There are places on this planet where time has stopped islands so remote, so dangerous, or so sacred that no human is permitted to walk their shores. They exist on maps but remain unreachable, marked not by cities or harbours, but by silence. Some are sealed by law, guarded by governments or navies. Others by nature itself, radiation, poison gas, or the fury of the earth. A few are forbidden for reasons older than memory, where even the locals speak of spirits that walk after dusk. From the scorched sands of nuclear atolls to the untouched jungles of sacred islands, each one holds a story of exclusion and a warning. They are places where science, myth, and secrecy overlap, where the world's most remote frontiers remind us how thin the line is between civilization and wilderness, between curiosity and danger. In this journey, we'll explore 27 of these forbidden islands, the ones humanity cannot claim. Some are protected by treaties, others by superstition. Some hide scars left by war and experiment. Others remain exactly as they were thousands of years ago. We'll travel from the deadly reefs of the Bay of Bengal to the icy voids of the Arctic, from volcanic coasts that breathe sulfur to coral atolls that glow faintly with radiation. Each island has its own reason for saying no. Some whisper it through legends. Others shout it through warning signs and patrol ships. And yet, the pull remains that endless human need to see what's hidden, to step where no one is allowed. Because sometimes, the most haunting places on Earth aren't lost beneath the sea or buried in jungle ruins. They're still here, waiting, forbidden, and watching from the horizon. In the dark waters of the Bay of Bengal lies a place untouched by time. North Sentinel Island, home to a tribe that has repelled every outsider for over 60,000 years. No visitor has ever returned alive. Even the airspace above it is restricted. A silent circle of sea and forest that hides one of humanity's last mysteries. At first glance, North Sentinel looks like paradise, a small emerald set in turquoise water, fringed by coral and ringed by reefs. The shoreline is guarded by figures with bows and spears, their movements deliberate, their message unmistakable. They do not want contact. When fishermen stray too near, their boats are met with a hail of arrows. When helicopters hover above, they rise from the trees, weapons drawn, aiming skyward. The Sentinelese have survived millennia by remaining unseen. The Indian government classifies the island as off-limits under the Andaman and Nicobar Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Act. A 5-kilometre exclusion zone encircles it not to protect outsiders from the tribe, but to protect the tribe from outsiders. Diseases as common as a cold could wipe out an entire population that has never built immunity to modern pathogens. Anthropologists estimate their number at no more than 50 to 150 people, living in huts of palm and driftwood, hunting with handcrafted arrows, and fishing in shallow lagoons that have sustained them since the last ice age. The first known contact came in 1867, when an Indian merchant ship, the Nineveh, wrecked on the reefs. The survivors reported being attacked by dark-skinned men with spears before they were rescued days later. Later colonial expeditions tried to civilize the island, bringing gifts of coconuts, pigs, and iron tools. Most ended in blood. In 1896, an escaped convict washed ashore. Days later, a search party found his body, pierced with arrows and left on the beach as a warning. Even in modern times, the story has repeated. In 2006, 2 fishermen drifting too close at night were killed instantly. Their bodies remain buried somewhere beneath the sand, unreachable, unclaimed, unpunished. Yet the island's hostility tells a deeper story. Genetic studies of neighbouring tribes, like the Onge and Jarawa, reveal lineages stretching back tens of thousands of years, a direct connection to the earliest migrations out of Africa. The Sentinelese may represent one of the last unbroken human bloodlines from that era. Their isolation has preserved not just their culture, but their genome, an unaltered echo of what humanity once was before cities, before writing, before contact changed everything. A handful of recorded encounters offer fleeting glimpses into their world. In 1967, a team of Indian anthropologists led by T.N. Pandit made cautious visits to the island's coast, leaving coconuts, bananas, and metal tools. At times, the Sentinelese accepted the gifts. At others, they fired warning arrows. In one surreal exchange, a Sentinelese man buried a pig that had been offered to him instead of eating it, a ritual gesture no outsider could interpret. Then, without warning, the tribe vanished back into the forest, leaving only footprints in the sand. The most famous confrontation came in 2018. An American missionary, John Allen Chau, attempted to contact the tribe despite the ban. He wrote in his diary that he wanted to bring them the word of God. His final notes described men emerging from the trees, bows drawn, as he shouted greetings from his kayak. The next morning, fishermen saw his body being dragged along the beach. The world's reaction was divided. Outrage, fascination, reverence. For the Sentinelese, it was likely just another defense of their home. Satellite imagery shows the island today, a dense green canopy, untouched by roads or smoke, surrounded by reefs that act as a natural moat. No one knows their language, their beliefs, or their stories. Every attempt to understand them risks destroying what has survived longer than any civilization on Earth. And somewhere beneath those trees, unseen by satellites and unreachable by history, the last tribe of the Stone Age still walks silent, watchful, and waiting for the next intruder who dares to break their circle of time. In 1963, a fishing boat off Iceland's southern coast witnessed the impossible, an island rising from the sea in a column of steam. Surtsey was born from a volcanic eruption beneath the Atlantic, and since then, no human settlement has been allowed. Scientists say the island is Earth's living laboratory, sealed to preserve its evolution. It began on the morning of November 14th, 1963. The crew of the trawler Islifer II was navigating calm seas when the ocean itself seemed to explode. Within minutes, a column of black smoke shot thousands of meters into the air, followed by glowing fragments of molten rock. The captain at first believed a ship had detonated, but as the haze cleared, something extraordinary appeared. A newborn island, rising from the depths where only waves had existed the day before. The eruption continued for months, building a landmass nearly 2 square kilometers in size. Icelanders named it Surtsey, after Surtur, the fire giant of Norse mythology who, according to legend, would one day bring about the end of the world. For a brief moment, the island burned with the raw violence of creation. Temperatures inside the vents reached over 1,000 degrees Celsius, boiling seawater on contact. Ash clouds rolled across the horizon, blotting out the Sunday. From the mainland, the people of Jaime watched the ocean give birth to land, an echo of Earth's earliest epochs when continents themselves were still molten. But as the eruption slowed, something remarkable began to happen. The fury of the volcano gave way to silence, and the island began to cool. Steam turned to mist, and the newborn land began its slow transformation from fire to life. When scientists first set foot on Surtsey in 1964, they wore protective suits and carried sterilized instruments. The island was declared a biological sanctuary, one of the few places on Earth where nature could be observed entirely free of human interference. No one was allowed to stay overnight. No seeds, no soil, not even a crumb of food could be left behind. Researchers wanted to see how life would colonize a barren world, step by step, exactly as it might have millions of years ago after volcanic creation. At first, there was only ash and basalt. The surface cracked beneath each footstep, still warm from the magma below. But within months, life began to arrive first by wind, then by sea. Mosses and lichens anchored themselves to the black rock, creating the first fragile footholds. seabirds began nesting on the cliffs, their droppings fertilizing the soil, their feathers carrying seeds. By 1967, green shoots had appeared: sea rocket, oyster plant, and later, willow. By the 1982, Surtsey had meadows, worms in its soil, and insects hovering over small pools of rainwater. Every new species was recorded, every arrival documented. In just a few decades, a world had evolved from nothing. Yet Surtsey's transformation also revealed how fragile new worlds can be. In the 1970 seconds, researchers discovered an unwelcome guest: tomato plants. Seeds had likely arrived in human waste, accidentally dropped from visiting ships. The plants were quickly removed to preserve the island's purity. Even a single mistake, scientists warned, could rewrite the natural experiment unfolding there. Since then, every visitor's boots and equipment are sterilized before landing. Even journalists and film crews must apply for rare permits, and drones are banned. Today, Surtsey remains off-limits to all but a handful of researchers. From the air, it looks like a dark crescent surrounded by restless seas, its coastline slowly eroding. Volcanic islands like it rarely last more than a few centuries before the waves claim them again. Its soils record the sequence of life's return, the exact order of colonization, the pace of microbial growth. The hidden dialogue between fire and biology. In 2008, UNESCO granted it World Heritage status, calling it a unique natural laboratory. No hotels, no roads, no human footprints remain, just the wind, the gulls, and the quiet memory of fire. Scientists say that even now, beneath its cooling crust, magma still moves slow, patient, and alive. And somewhere below the waves, another Surtsey may already be forming, waiting for its moment to rise and remind us how the world began. Just 17 miles from Kauai, Niihau glimmers beneath the Pacific sun, but no tourist can ever walk its beaches. Privately owned since 1864, it's guarded by generations of Hawaiian families who live without roads, electricity, or outsiders. Only a handful of visitors have ever seen what life looks like inside. To the untrained eye, Niihau looks like paradise. Golden dunes stretch toward red cliffs, and turquoise waves break over untouched coral reefs. Yet beyond that beauty lies a place locked in another time, a world without cell towers, streetlights, or paved roads. Fewer than 100 residents live there, speaking an unbroken form of the Hawaiian language that has vanished everywhere else. No cars hum through its dirt paths, no planes fly overhead without permission. The outside world has been kept at bay for over a century and a half. The story of Niihau's isolation begins in the reign of King Kamehameha IV. In 1864, the Scottish widow Elizabeth Sinclair purchased the island for $10,000 in gold from the Hawaiian monarchy. Her promise was simple. She would protect the native population and their traditions. The Sinclairs kept that promise perhaps too well. Over generations, her descendants enforced a policy of complete seclusion. No strangers could settle, no journalists could film, and no traveller could visit without explicit invitation. To this day, Niihau remains owned by the Robinson family, direct descendants of Sinclair. The family's stewardship preserved a culture nearly erased elsewhere in Hawaii. Residents live in small villages, their homes powered by solar panels or lanterns, their water drawn from rain catchments. English is spoken rarely. Hawaiian chants and oral histories are still performed under the stars. The island's people hunt wild sheep and pigs, fish by hand line, and gather shellfish from the reefs. There are no grocery stores, no hospitals, and no public schools in the modern sense. Supplies arrive only by barge from Kauai, and when residents leave for work or study, they return on small private helicopters. Niihau's rhythm of life hasn't changed in generations. For outsiders, access is nearly impossible. Even scientists and government officials must apply through private channels and are rarely approved. The US, Navy once used nearby waters for training, but even they were bound by strict no-landing rules. The isolation became so complete that during World War II, Niihau briefly entered the pages of history in an incident that seemed torn from fiction. On December 7th, 1941, the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor, a Japanese fighter pilot crash-landed on Niihau after his aircraft was damaged. Unaware of the attack, the islanders treated him kindly at first, offering food and shelter. But when news of the bombing reached them days later, the mood shifted. A struggle broke out between the locals and the pilot, aided by two Japanese-speaking residents caught between loyalty to neighbours and heritage. The fight ended in tragedy, the pilot and one accomplice killed, and Niihau forever branded in military records as the Island Incident. For a brief moment, the outside world had intruded. When it left, the island closed itself again. Over the years, rumours have flourished about what life on Niihau is really like. Some imagine it as a paradise preserved in time, others as a place of secrecy and control. The truth lies somewhere between. While the Robinson family restricts entry, they also provide for the island's needs education, healthcare and trade managed through Kauai. Still, no photographs are published without approval, and no outsider can buy land or stay overnight. Even the few helicopter tours that fly near its coast are forbidden from landing. For ecologists, Niihau represents one of the last intact Hawaiian ecosystems. Endangered monk seals rest undisturbed on its beaches. Native plants long extinct on other islands thrive in its dry lowlands. The isolation that shields its people also shelters its wildlife. Scientists compare it to a natural museum, one where both culture and nature remain unbroken. From the air, Niihau appears timeless, a crescent of gold and green, floating in blue stillness. But beneath its quiet surface, it carries the tension between protection and exclusion, between preserving a way of life and sealing it off from the world. For those who live there, it is not a secret. It is home. For everyone else, Niihau remains the one Hawaiian island you can see but never truly know, and as the sun sets over the Pacific, its beaches shimmer, empty and untouched, guarded by wind, by sea, and by silence itself. Off Brazil's coast lies an island so dangerous the Navy patrols its perimeter. 1 square metre per snake, thousands of golden lanceheads, their venom melting flesh within hours. Locals call it Ilha da Queimada Grande. Scientists call it a living nightmare. 62 miles off the coast of São Paulo, Queimada Grande rises from the Atlantic like an emerald dagger, steep cliffs, dense vegetation, and silence. But beneath the greenery, the ground itself seems to move. Coiled among roots, hanging from branches, and slipping through the rocks are some of the deadliest snakes on Earth. Their bodies shimmer bronze and gold beneath the sunlight, their eyes unblinking, their fangs sheathed in venom potent enough to liquefy tissue. No human lives here. Few have dared to land. The island's legend began centuries ago. Sailors told stories of entire crews vanishing after making landfall, their remains found days later, covered in puncture wounds. Others spoke of a lighthouse keeper who stayed behind when the island was evacuated in the 1,920 seconds his body discovered at the base of the tower, surrounded by snakes that had slipped through cracks in the walls. Since then, the Brazilian Navy has forbidden entry. A single lighthouse now operates automatically, maintained only by remote systems. Patrol boats circle the waters, ensuring that no curious adventurer or poacher sets foot on the island's lethal soil. The golden lancehead's presence is a quirk of isolation and evolution. Thousands of years ago, the island was part of the mainland. Rising sea levels cut it off, trapping a population of pit vipers with no predators and limited prey. Over millennia, they adapted. Their venom evolved to kill quickly, fast enough to strike down seabirds before they could take flight. Scientists studying it describe it as one of the most potent hemotoxins in nature, capable of destroying muscle and dissolving blood vessels within minutes. A single bite can kill a human in under an hour. Researchers who have studied the snakes under strict supervision wear thick boots, padded gloves, and carry antivenom prepared for emergencies. Even then, few remain on the island for more than a day. Every step must be calculated. Fallen branches conceal coiled shapes. Hollow tree trunks hide more. On sunny days, snakes drape themselves over low branches to warm their bodies. On cloudy days, they blend into the damp forest floor. The density is staggering. Some estimates suggest between 2,000 and 5,000 snakes spread across just 43 hectares. That's roughly 1 per square metre in certain areas, but the danger goes beyond the reptiles. The island's terrain itself is treacherous sheer cliffs, loose stone, and thick undergrowth make movement slow and perilous. One misstep, and a fall or brush against foliage could be fatal. For this reason, the Brazilian government has declared Queimada Grande a restricted zone, allowing only carefully vetted scientific teams to enter under naval escort. Poachers who attempt to capture snakes for the illegal wildlife trade risk instant death. The black market values a single golden lancehead at up to $30,000, coveted by collectors and pharmaceutical researchers alike. Despite its lethal reputation, Queimada Grande is also a fragile ecosystem. The snakes depend on migratory birds that rest on the island during long flights across the Atlantic. Climate change and declining bird populations threaten that balance. Ironically, the species that has kept humans away for centuries now faces extinction if its habitat collapses. To protect both the snakes and themselves, scientists have proposed complete isolation. From the air, the island appears calm, a green jewel in blue water, waves breaking against black rock. But pilots know better than to linger. Even from above, the thought of what lies below inspires unease. The golden lanceheads wait, silent and motionless. A population evolved in solitude. There are places on Earth meant to be explored, and there are places meant to be respected from afar. Queimada Grande belongs to the latter. Here, every leaf could hide death, every shadow could move. It is a reminder that in some corners of the world, nature still rules absolutely, and that no matter how far science advances, there remain islands where humanity simply does not belong. Hidden in the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia looks like a tropical paradise. But beneath the palms lies one of the most secretive military bases on Earth. The island's original inhabitants were exiled, their homes bulldozed. Even today, the surrounding waters are closed to the world. A crescent of white sand and turquoise water, Diego Garcia sits at the heart of the Chagos archipelago, halfway between Africa and Indonesia, in one of the most remote stretches of ocean on the planet. From the air, it looks like a dream, a coral atoll shaped like a horseshoe, enclosing a calm lagoon the colour of glass. But what lies within that lagoon is not a resort or a sanctuary. It is a fortress, a base so restricted that commercial maps once depicted the island as an empty patch of sea. For centuries, Diego Garcia was home to the Chagosians, a Creole-speaking people descended from African, Indian and Malay settlers. They lived simple lives, harvesting coconuts, fishing and singing folk songs in the evening air. Their ancestors had arrived as workers under French rule in the late 18th century. By the mid-1900s, the community numbered around 2,000 small, self-sufficient, and largely forgotten by the wider world. That changed in the 1960s, when the Cold War brought new eyes to this quiet corner of the Indian Ocean. In 1966, Britain secretly leased the island to the United States for use as a military base. The agreement was signed without public knowledge, part of a series of classified defence deals between London and Washington. What followed was one of the most controversial mass displacements in modern history. Over the next few years, every Chagosian was forced to leave their home. British officials described the islanders in cold bureaucratic terms as transient labourers, denying their claim to the land their families had lived on for generations. Reports from the time describe scenes of quiet heartbreak. Their homes, churches and gardens were demolished. Between 1968 and 1973, ships carried the entire population away first to Mauritius, then to the Seychelles with little more than what they could carry. Many fell into poverty and illness. Their exile, they would later say, was not just a loss of home but of identity. Meanwhile, construction began on one of the most significant military installations outside the continental United States. The U.S. Navy and Air Force transformed Diego Garcia into a strategic hub, complete with runways long enough for heavy bombers, radar domes, fuel depots, and a deep-water harbour capable of anchoring an entire carrier group. During the Gulf War, B-52 bombers launched missions from its tarmac. During the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the island served as a forward operating base for surveillance and refueling. Its official designation, Camp Justice. What makes Diego Garcia even more mysterious are the layers of secrecy surrounding it. Journalists and researchers are rarely allowed entry. Satellite images are censored. In the early 2000s, human rights groups accused the CIA of using the island as a black site for interrogations and prisoner transfers during the War on Terror, claims both the U.S. and U.K. governments denied, though flight logs later revealed suspicious stopovers. Environmental reports suggest parts of the lagoon remain contaminated from fuel storage and waste disposal. But no independent verification has been permitted. For the displaced Chagossians, the fight for return continues. They have taken their case to British courts, to the European Court of Human Rights, and to the United Nations, all with limited success. In 2019, the International Court of Justice ruled that Britain's control of the Chagos Islands was unlawful, and that sovereignty should revert to Mauritius. The UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly in agreement. Yet the base remains, guarded and operational, its runway stretching across the very land where children once played under coconut trees. To this day, the atoll is encircled by restricted waters. Civilian ships are forbidden. Aircraft that cross its airspace must secure prior clearance. Google Earth imagery blurs its finer details. From the perspective of the outside world, Diego Garcia exists and does not exist, a paradox of paradise and secrecy. At sunset, when patrol boats glide across the lagoon and the last light fades from the coral rim, the island looks serene, palms swaying, waves breaking softly on sand that once carried the footprints of an entire people. Yet, beneath that stillness lies a silence shaped by displacement, secrecy, and power. For the exiled families who still sing songs of home in the markets of Port Louis, Diego Garcia is more than a place. It is a ghost, an island erased not by nature. Poveglia, the island of the dead. Between Venice and Lido drifts a small patch of land where millions of plague victims were burned. Later, it became an asylum whose patients whispered of voices in the walls. Now it's sealed by law, a forbidden ruin sinking slowly into the lagoon. To the casual traveller gliding through the Venetian lagoon, Poveglia appears no different from the countless other small islands that dot the shallow waters, overgrown, silent, and half drowned beneath ivy and fog. But this one carries a weight heavier than history itself. Beneath its soil lies ash and bone, layer upon layer of it, the remains of those who met their end in one of Europe's darkest eras. Even the fishermen of Venice steer clear, saying, "The earth there does not forgive." The island's story begins in the 14th century, during the height of the Black Death. As plague swept across Europe, Venice, a city of trade and close quarters, became one of its hardest hit ports. With no cure and no hope, the sick were herded onto barges and ferried away to Poveglia. then a quarantine island. Here they were left to die, surrounded by water, smoke, and the smell of burning flesh. When the bodies overwhelmed the ground, they were set aflame in open pits. Historical estimates suggest that over 160,000 men, women and children were buried or burned here, though locals say the true number reaches the millions. Even centuries later, the soil of Poveglia remains black and oily, made up, scientists say, of nearly 50% human ash. When plague returned in the 1600s and again in the 1700s, the island's role remained the same. Ships approaching Venice were stopped at Poveglia, their crews inspected and held for weeks. Those who showed symptoms were never seen again. Over time, fear gave the island a name that still lingers: L'Isola dei Morti, the Island of the Dead. By the late 18th century, the fires had long cooled, but the stigma endured. Few dared to live there, and even fewer dared to visit. Yet in 1922, the Venetian government repurposed the ruins into something equally chilling: a mental asylum. Officially, it was a hospital for the mentally ill. Unofficially, it was a place to hide away those society wished to forget. Patients were said to complain of voices calling to them from beneath the floors. Nurses reported hearing footsteps echo through empty corridors. And at night, lights were seen flickering in the bell tower long after curfew. One of the asylum's directors, a doctor whose name was deliberately omitted from early records, became infamous for his experiments. According to local accounts, he conducted crude lobotomies using makeshift instruments, drilling into patients' skulls without anesthesia. He claimed the island's atmosphere heightened the mind's sensitivity to trauma, and that he could hear the madness in his patients. Years later, legend says he began hearing the same whispers himself. Unable to bear it, he climbed the asylum's bell tower and leapt into the mist. The nurses who found his body swore they saw a shadow rise from the lagoon that night, and the bell never rang again. The hospital closed in 1968, and since then, Poveglia has been abandoned. The remaining buildings, the asylum, the bell tower, and the chapel stand in decay, their walls covered in mould and graffiti, their windows shattered by storms. Officially, the island is off-limits. Entry without authorization is a crime punishable by fine. Yet every few years, a curious soul manages to sneak across the channel. Some return shaken, speaking of footsteps in empty halls. Others describe a strange silence, a stillness so complete that even the waves seem to stop when they step ashore. Today, Poveglia remains one of the most haunted places in Europe, though few believe the word haunted does it justice. It is less a place of ghosts than of memory, a wound in the lagoon that never closed. Vegetation now reclaims the ruins, wrapping stone and steel alike. From the water, the bell tower leans like a broken tooth against the horizon. Tourists passing nearby sometimes mistake it for beauty. The Venetians know better. They lower their voices, cross themselves, and look away. Beneath that calm water, beneath centuries of sediment and time, lie the bones of plague victims, asylum patients, and doctors alike, all fused into the earth of an island that once held the dying of an empire. And though the fires went out long ago, the air around Poveglia still feels heavy, as if the island itself remembers what it was built upon: the Anthrax experiment. In 1942, the British military tested biological weapons on a tiny Scottish island. Anthrax spores still linger in its soil decades later. Though declared safe in 1990, no one lives there. Locals still call it Death Island. Gruinard Island lies off the northwest coast of Scotland, small, barren and wind-beaten, barely 2 kilometres long. To passing boats, it looks harmless, a lonely green rise surrounded by cold Atlantic waters. But for half a century, this scrap of land was one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The story began during the height of World War II, when Britain faced the terrifying possibility that Nazi Germany might deploy biological weapons. In response, the British government decided to test its own. Under a veil of secrecy, scientists from the top-secret research centre at Porton Down selected Gruinard as their proving ground. Its isolation made it perfect, no permanent population, strong currents to carry contamination away, and the kind of remoteness that kept questions from being asked. In 1942, military vessels ferried men, equipment, and a deadly cargo to the island. Hundreds of sheep, along with flasks of Bacillus anthracis, the bacterium that causes anthrax. Over several weeks, the team detonated bombs filled with anthrax spores across the island's grassy slopes. Observers watched through binoculars from ships anchored offshore. Within days, the sheep began to die, their bodies swelling grotesquely, foam seeping from their mouths. The results were horrifyingly effective. The spores clung to the soil and resisted wind, rain, and sunlight. When scientists returned weeks later, they found the bacteria still active, unchanged, deadly, and enduring. What they hadn't anticipated was just how enduring it would be. The tests ended, but the island was now fatally contaminated. Attempts to neutralize the spores failed. Even small samples taken back to laboratories remained infectious years later. The military posted warning signs along the nearby coast and declared the island off-limits indefinitely. For locals in the nearby village of Layade, Gruinard became the stuff of nightmares, a forbidden shape on the horizon that everyone knew but no one approached. Fishermen avoided its waters, parents told their children never to swim near it. Even seabirds seemed to shun its beaches. As the decades passed, official silence deepened the mystery. Some speculated the island was still being used for secret experiments. Others feared the spores could drift ashore during storms. In 1981, an anonymous group calling itself the Dark Harvest Commandos reignited the controversy. They claimed to have landed on Gruinard and taken contaminated soil, which they then deposited outside the Porton Down research facility. Proof, they said, that the government had abandoned a deadly weapon just miles from civilian shores. The story made headlines across Britain, and public pressure mounted. For the first time in nearly 40 years, officials admitted that Gruinard had indeed been poisoned beyond habitation. It took until the late 1980 seconds for decontamination to begin. Workers in full protective suits sprayed the island with a solution of formaldehyde mixed into seawater, over 200 tons of it. They burned infected vegetation, buried the remains, and tested again and again for traces of anthrax. After extensive monitoring, Gruinard was finally declared safe in 1990, and its ownership was returned to the descendants of the family who had been forced to sell it to the government in 1942. Yet few were convinced. Locals still avoid landing there, and the name Death Island remains spoken with quiet unease. Even now, scientists admit that anthrax spores can survive for centuries under the right conditions, dormant, invisible, waiting. Soil samples from Gruinard still test positive for biological residues that no one fully understands. The grass has returned, sheep once again graze nearby, and official signs proclaim the danger over. But beneath the surface lies history that cannot easily be washed away. To this day, few boats approach its shore. The wind that whips across the Hebrides carries no scent, no sound, only a silence heavy with memory. Gruinard Island stands as a grim monument to an era when fear drove nations to test the unthinkable, and when a patch of Scottish soil became a weapon in a war that never reached its borders. On Japan's volcanic arc, Mount Mihara breathes sulphur. When the gas grows dense, alarms wail and residents flee wearing gas masks. The government restricts entry. For much of the year, the air itself is lethal. Just 100 kilometers south of Tokyo, across the restless waters of the Philippine Sea, lies Izu Oshima, a small volcanic island that looks peaceful from above. Ferries glide into its harbour, cherry trees bloom along its slopes, and beyond the coastline the horizon glows a soft silver. But at its heart rises a mountain that never sleeps. Mount Mihara, one of the most active volcanoes in Japan. Here, life and death are divided by something as simple as a breath. For centuries, the people of Oshima have lived in the shadow of Mihara's crater. Ancient records mention eruptions as far back as the 8th century, but it was the events of the 20th century that turned the island into one of the strangest, most perilous places in the Pacific. In 1951, a violent explosion sent lava cascading down the mountain, wiping out entire villages and forcing mass evacuations. The eruption left behind a permanent wound, a smoking vent that constantly exhaled sulfur dioxide into the air. The gas drifted over homes and forests, invisible yet deadly, corroding metal and burning the lungs of anyone who lingered too long. To live here meant to live with gas masks. By the late 1972, the island's 10,000 residents were trained to recognize the signs. A sudden shift in wind, a metallic taste in the air, or the faint hiss of venting gas. When sensors detected rising sulfur levels, warning sirens echoed through the hills, and families sealed their windows, waiting for the wind to turn. Schools and hospitals kept oxygen tanks ready. Even the island's dogs learned to panic at the sound of alarms. Then came 1986. Without warning, Mount Mihara erupted again, one of the largest volcanic events in modern Japanese history. Ash clouds rose more than a mile into the sky. Rivers of lava flowed toward the sea, setting forests alight and cutting off escape routes. Over 12,000 people were evacuated to the mainland in a single night, leaving behind a blackened wasteland where even the air burned. Scientists later measured the sulfur concentration at lethal levels high enough to kill in minutes. For 2 years afterward, no one was allowed to return. The government designated Oshima an exclusion zone, and patrols were stationed to prevent trespassers. When the evacuation order was finally lifted, only a fraction of the original residents came back. Many homes had been buried or corroded beyond repair. Those who returned found a landscape that seemed alive, hissing vents, steaming cracks, and air thick with invisible poison. Even today, gas monitors are stationed across the island. Red lights flash when sulfur levels spike, and locals know the rule. When the siren sounds, you run uphill, not down. Gas sinks into valleys like water, pooling in low ground and suffocating everything that breathes. Yet despite the danger, Oshima draws a peculiar kind of visitor. Geologists, thrill seekers, and even filmmakers come here, drawn by the eerie beauty of the volcano. The black lava fields, still warm in places, stretch for miles like a lunar plain. The crater rim offers a view into the Earth's raw furnace glowing vents, where molten rock still churns beneath the crust. But the fascination is shadowed by tragedy. For decades, the island carried another, darker reputation. In the early 20th century, Mount Mihara became infamous as a place where people came to end their lives, drawn by the simplicity of stepping into the crater's toxic breath. During the 1930 seconds, reports described hundreds of cases, leading authorities to restrict access. Today, fences and guards line the rim. But the mountain's legend endures a reminder that beauty and danger have always walked together on Oshima. In recent years, scientists have warned that Mihara's activity is increasing again. Seismic tremors ripple beneath its slopes, and new fissures vent thin streams of gas. The island remains inhabited, but always under watch, its residents living between calm and catastrophe, knowing that the next alarm could come at any moment. At sunset, when the wind dies and the sea grows still, the sulfur haze drifts low across the crater, glowing faintly in the fading light. From the shore, the island seems peaceful, but those who live here understand the truth. On Oshima, the air itself is a warning, and every breath is borrowed. In the Aral Sea, a former Soviet lab tested smallpox, anthrax, and plague strains. When the sea receded, the island fused to the mainland, releasing spores buried beneath the sand. The land remains under armed quarantine, In the heart of Central Asia, where turquoise water once shimmered under an endless sky, lies the ghost of a sea, the Aral. Now little more than a desert of salt and sand, and in that desert sits a place that should never have existed. Vozrozhdeniya Island, once the center of the Soviet Union's most secret and dangerous biological weapons program. For decades, it was erased from maps, guarded by soldiers, and known only to those who worked behind its fences. Today, the water that once isolated it has vanished, leaving its deadly legacy exposed to the wind. During the Cold War, the Soviet government transformed Vozrozhdeniya, whose name means rebirth in Russian, into a testing site for pathogens so lethal they could erase entire populations. Established in the 1950 seconds, the facility was run by Biopreparat, the Soviet agency responsible for biological warfare research. Officially, it was described as a field laboratory for disease control. In reality, it was a proving ground for weaponized anthrax, smallpox, tularemia, and plague. The island's location made it ideal. The Aral Sea provided natural isolation, separating the base from villages and cities by hundreds of kilometers of water. Here, Soviet scientists could conduct open-air tests using animals and, according to some declassified documents, possibly human prisoners. Cages filled with monkeys, goats, and rodents lined the testing fields. Within days, the animals would die, their bodies incinerated or buried in deep pits marked only by small metal tags. The heat, the dryness, and the wind carried traces of those experiments across the island, traces that would never disappear. For the thousands of personnel stationed there, life was a paradox of secrecy and routine. Families lived in prefabricated housing blocks with playgrounds and schools. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, while researchers in protective suits worked in sealed laboratories. Locals from nearby fishing towns occasionally saw the glow of lights across the water but were forbidden to approach. When they asked what the island was for, officials answered simply, "Research." Everything changed in the 1990 seconds. The Soviet Union collapsed, and with it, the funding that had sustained the secret base. Scientists fled, leaving behind laboratories, sealed vials, and buried stockpiles of pathogens. Without maintenance, the island began to decay, and then nature delivered the final twist. The Aral Sea began to die. Decades of irrigation projects diverted its tributaries until the waterline retreated completely. By the late 1990 seconds, Vozrozhdeniya was no longer an island. It was connected to the mainland, and whatever had been buried there now lay open to the desert winds. When Western scientists arrived in 2002 under joint US-Uzbek operations, what they found was chilling. Rusted fences surrounded laboratories filled with shattered glassware and broken containment chambers. In shallow graves nearby, soil samples tested positive for Bacillus anthracis, live anthrax spores still viable after 50 years. The US military funded a cleanup effort, burning contaminated soil and sealing pits under concrete. But experts admitted they could never be sure they had found everything. In a landscape of shifting dunes, thousands of burial sites could remain hidden. Today, the area is designated a biological hazard zone. Armed patrols restrict access, and the few locals who graze livestock nearby report strange illnesses among their animals. Desert storms sometimes uncover bones and metal fragments stamped with Soviet markings. Environmental scientists warn that rising temperatures and desertification could release more spores into the air. Each gust of wind, they say, carries a whisper from the past, one that science can neither trace nor silence. The tragedy of Vozrozhdeniya mirrors the fate of the Aral Sea itself, both victims of human ambition unchecked. One was drained for cotton fields, the other poisoned in the name of defense. Together, they form one of the world's largest man-made ecological and biological disasters. From space, the island's remnants still form a pale scar in the middle of the desert. A ghost outline of what was once a sea, and beneath that silence, buried deep in the sand, lie spores that can outlast empires. Satellite images reveal reefs that appear and vanish overnight. Mariners avoid them, whispering of ships that strike invisible land. Scientists suspect shifting volcanic vents, but no one has set foot there to prove it. In the vast emptiness of the South Pacific, east of Tonga, and just beyond the coral cliffs of Niue, lies a stretch of ocean that refuses to stay still. There, beneath waters so clear they mirror the sky, something moves land that shouldn't exist, and sometimes doesn't. Charts drawn a century apart mark the same coordinates differently. Sometimes as reefs, sometimes as shoals, sometimes as open water. Sailors call them phantom atolls. Scientists call them anomalies. And no one, not even with modern technology, can say for certain what they truly are. The mystery first appeared in the logbooks of 19th century whalers. In 1873, the James B. Hay recorded scraping its hull against a submerged ridge of coral in a place where no land was charted. The crew described seeing pale shapes beneath the surface, like sandbars rising through the blue. When they returned months later, the reef was gone, swallowed by the sea. Dozens of similar reports followed. Vessels sighting land that later vanished, captains mapping islets that the next expedition could not find. Even the Royal Navy, meticulous in its surveys, began to omit certain coordinates, labelling them unverified. For most of the 20th century, the mystery faded into maritime folklore until the satellites came. In the early 2000s, digital imagery of the Niuean region revealed something impossible. At specific locations east of the island, circular shadows appeared on high-resolution scans, perfect rings of reef and sand, 2 to 3 kilometers wide. In later passes, the same spots showed nothing but open water. No tides could explain the change, no seasonal currents could shift entire islands, yet the patterns persisted, forming and dissolving with irregular rhythm, like breathing. Oceanographers from the University of Auckland proposed one of the few plausible theories. Volcanic uplift. The seafloor here lies along a fault line that marks the edge of the Pacific Plate, a region prone to undersea quakes and thermal vents. When magma rises close to the surface, it can create temporary cones of solidified ash and rock islands born overnight, only to collapse again when the eruption cools. Historical precedent supports it. In 1811, an island appeared near Tonga, lived for a few weeks, then vanished beneath the waves. In 1995, another rose and sank within days. But the Niuean anomalies are different. They reappear in the same places, often with near-identical shapes. It is as if the sea itself remembers where land once stood. Local fishermen have their own explanations. They speak of Timotu Moana, the sea island, a place that rises when the ocean gods grow restless. According to Niuean oral tradition, it is not land, but a living being that surfaces when the balance between earth and sea is disturbed. Some say they've seen birds resting on it at dawn, only for the entire formation to vanish by noon. The Polynesian navigators who once crossed these waters avoided the area entirely, steering their canoes along safer routes marked by the stars. Even modern sailors, guided by GPS, report unsettling moments when their depth gauges spike from thousands of meters to near zero, then drop again in seconds. Expeditions have tried to reach the site, but the region's violent weather and unpredictable currents make it nearly impossible. In 2017, a joint survey vessel from New Zealand and Tonga attempted to locate one of the phantom atolls using sonar. The instruments picked up a massive mound of sediment, 400 meters below the surface, releasing streams of methane bubbles, evidence of an active vent. Only a thermal anomaly remained, hovering like a ghost in the data. Scientists believe these underwater vents could be part of a larger volcanic system hidden beneath the Pacific crust. Each eruption pushes material upward, briefly forming reefs that later collapse under their own weight. Over centuries, they could one day stabilize into permanent land or disappear forever. But with the Argo Basin stretching nearly 4,000 kilometers in every direction, the odds of observing such a process in real time are slim. From the quiet villages of Niue, islanders still watch the horizon for changes, for a shimmer, a shadow, a hint of land that wasn't there yesterday. To them, the ocean is alive, its moods unpredictable, its memory long. Whether the disappearing atolls are volcanic ghosts or illusions born of shifting light, they remind us that the map of the world is never finished. Beneath the calm blue surface, the Earth continues to move, to breathe, to rewrite itself one vanishing island at a time. In 1945, British soldiers recorded one of history's strangest horrors. Hundreds of Japanese troops vanished in the mangrove swamps of Ramree, Burma. Survivors spoke of crocodiles moving through the night, an island that devoured men whole. Ramree lies off the coast of Myanmar, a low, humid expanse of jungle and brackish channels. Its mangroves stretch for miles, their roots twisting like skeletal hands through black water. During World War II, this place became the site of one of the most nightmarish episodes in military history. A battle not between armies, but between men and nature itself. In January 1945, the Allies launched an offensive to retake Ramree from Japanese forces who had fortified the island as part of Japan's defensive line across the Bay of Bengal. The British 26th Division advanced inland, supported by naval bombardment and airstrikes. The Japanese garrison, numbering roughly 1,000 soldiers, was quickly outmaneuvered. Cut off from escape routes and supplies, they fled into the swamps, a decision that would seal their fate. The mangrove marshes of Ramree are no ordinary wetlands. The air is thick with heat and decay, the mud waist-deep and clinging. The tide rises and falls unpredictably, flooding the land with salt water. Mosquitoes swarm in clouds, leeches attach themselves in seconds, and lurking beneath the surface, invisible and silent, are the largest reptiles on Earth. The saltwater crocodiles of Burma, some stretching over 6 meters in length. As night fell on January 19th, the trapped Japanese soldiers tried to cross the swamp under cover of darkness. British troops held their positions on the perimeter, listening. What followed became one of the most chilling nights ever recorded in wartime history. According to official accounts and eyewitness testimony, screams echoed across the marsh. Gunfire erupted, then fell silent. One British Marine later wrote, "That night was the most horrible that any member of the ML crews ever experienced. The crocodiles were upon them, and the sounds that came from the darkness defy description. By dawn, the swamp was still. When Allied search parties entered the area days later, they found only a handful of survivors delirious, wounded, and starving. The rest had disappeared. Out of roughly 1,000 soldiers who entered the marsh, only 20 were ever found alive. The remainder were presumed dead victims of hunger, infection, or, as many believed, the crocodiles. Modern historians debate the details. Some argue that the death toll from crocodile attacks was likely exaggerated, fueled by fear and the chaos of war. Others note that the conditions described, mud, tidal flooding, and lack of visibility, made such attacks almost inevitable. The saltwater crocodile is known for its territorial aggression, capable of dragging a grown man underwater in seconds. With so many soldiers wading through their habitat at once, the outcome could indeed have been catastrophic. The Guinness Book of World Records once listed the incident as the greatest disaster suffered by humans from animals. While the exact number remains uncertain, the legend of Ramree Island endures not only as a tale of wartime tragedy, but as a haunting reminder of nature's power. Today, Ramree is a quiet, forgotten place. The mangroves still spread their roots into the dark tidal mud, and crocodiles still patrol the channels. The jungle has reclaimed the bunkers and airstrips, and the sounds of battle have long since faded into the calls of herons and insects. But locals say that at night, when the tide rises and the air hangs heavy with mist, strange noises drift from the swamp splashes, distant cries, echoes of a night when men vanished beneath the water. Whether myth or memory, the story of Ramree reminds us of a truth older than war itself. That in some corners of the earth, the most fearsome enemy is not another army, but the wilderness waiting in silence. Concrete towers rise from the waves off Nagasaki, a once thriving coal mining colony now frozen in time. Japan forbids open access. Every window, every corridor still holds helmets, shoes, and photos from a vanished world. Less than a kilometre long, Hashima Island, or Gunkanjima Battleship Island, once stood as a symbol of Japan's industrial might. In the early 20th century, it was a marvel of engineering. An artificial fortress rising straight out of the ocean, built to mine the coal that fueled Japan's rapid modernization. At its height, the island held more than 5,000 residents packed into just 15 acres, making it one of the most densely populated places on Earth. From a distance, Hashima looked like a floating city. Tiered concrete apartments, smokestacks, and seawalls forming a jagged silhouette against the horizon. Inside, life followed the relentless rhythm of the mines. Every morning, thousands of men descended deep below the seabed to extract the coal seams that powered Japan's navy and industries. Above ground, families lived in narrow apartments connected by tunnels and stairwells. Children played in rooftop courtyards, and shopkeepers sold rice, noodles, and sweets in the alleys between buildings. Despite its isolation, Hashima had its own schools, cinema, bathhouses, and even a pachinko parlor. But the prosperity came at a cost. During World War II, the island became a site of forced labor. Hundreds of Korean and Chinese prisoners were brought to Hashima to work under brutal conditions, sealed underground for shifts that lasted up to 16 hours. Many never left the mines alive. Records from the period remain incomplete, but survivors have described heat so intense it stripped skin, and water so foul that miners drank from dripping walls. When Japan surrendered in 1945, those labourers were quietly erased from official accounts, their names lost to the tides. After the war, coal remained vital to Japan's rebuilding efforts, and the island entered its final boom. By the 1952, families enjoyed amenities rare elsewhere: electric lighting, radio broadcasts, and concrete schools that stood like fortresses against the storms. Yet beneath that progress, the end was approaching. By the 1962, petroleum was replacing coal. The mines grew less profitable, and in 1974, Mitsubishi officially closed operations. Within months, the island was deserted. The departure was sudden. Entire homes left as they were, dinner plates on tables, tools on workbenches, calendars still marking the month the last ferry departed. Typhoons and salt air began to erode the buildings, their concrete facades crumbling like ash. The once bustling corridors became hollow chambers where the wind moaned through broken windows. Today, Hashima is strictly off-limits to the public, declared unsafe due to structural decay. Only a few sections are accessible to guided tours under heavy regulation. From afar, it looks almost surreal, a fortress city adrift in grey waves, wrapped in mist, as if waiting for its inhabitants to return. In 2015, UNESCO recognized Hashima as a World Heritage Site, acknowledging both its industrial significance and its darker history. Standing on the viewing platform today, visitors hear only the sea striking the seawall, a steady echo through empty concrete canyons. Once a monument to ambition, Hashima now endures as a monument to abandonment, a ghost city in the sea where the future came and went too fast, and time itself refused to leave. For 2 decades, the residents of Miyake-jima lived under constant volcanic gas. Visitors must carry oxygen masks. Even the schools have alarms for sulfur surges. Entry is permitted only with government clearance. 180 kilometers south of Tokyo, Miyake-jima sits in the Philippine Sea like a scar on the ocean's surface. The island, a near-perfect circle of forested slopes and black lava fields, is dominated by Mount Oyama, an active volcano that has shaped, destroyed, and reshaped the island countless times throughout history. To outsiders, Miyake-jima looks peaceful. Fishing boats gliding over calm water, clouds drifting lazily across its ridges, but beneath that calm lies one of the most unpredictable volcanoes in Japan, and the island's people have learned to live with danger as part of daily life. The most recent chapter of Miyake-jima's story began in the summer of 2000. After weeks of tremors, Mount Oyama erupted with explosive force. Ash and lava poured from the crater, scorching the surrounding forest. By August, hundreds of volcanic earthquakes shook the ground each day, and rivers of mud and debris swept through villages. When the eruption finally subsided, a new crisis emerged, one that could not be seen but could be felt in every breath. Gases rich in sulfur dioxide began to leak continuously from fissures around the volcano, poisoning the air. The concentration was so high that metal corroded, vegetation withered, and birds fell from the sky mid-flight. Authorities ordered the island completely evacuated. More than 3,600 residents were forced to abandon their homes, boarding ships to Tokyo under heavy masks and strict decontamination protocols. For 5 long years, Miyake-jima was a ghost island, a place where no one could live without risking suffocation. Gas levels were monitored daily, and instruments registered concentrations high enough to kill within minutes. The government debated whether the island could ever be resettled. In 2005, when emission levels finally began to decline, residents were allowed to return, but under extraordinary conditions. Each household received gas masks and portable oxygen meters. Warning sirens were installed across the island, sounding whenever sulfur levels spiked. Schools practiced gas drills alongside earthquake evacuations. Children learned from an early age to recognize the sharp, acrid smell that meant danger. Even today, visitors are required to carry masks at all times, and many shops display signs reminding people to check the wind before removing protection. Despite these measures, life continues. Fishermen still cast nets in the island's waters, farmers cultivate hardy crops that can survive the acidic soil, and tourists, those with government permits, come to witness the otherworldly beauty of a place balanced between survival and disaster. From the crater's rim, plumes of sulfur rise into the sky, staining the air a ghostly yellow. At night, they glow faintly under moonlight, an unending exhalation from the Earth's core. Scientists from Japan's meteorological agency maintain a permanent observation station here, monitoring the volcano's pulse around the clock. They call Miyake-jima a living laboratory, a place that shows how humans and nature coexist under constant threat. Yet for the residents, it is simply home, an island that breathes, and sometimes chokes. Even now, decades after the eruption, the danger has not disappeared. When that happens, alarms ring, doors shut, and the streets empty. Then, as quickly as it began, the wind changes again, and life resumes, fishermen returning to the docks, children laughing behind their masks. Miyake-jima endures as a paradox, a paradise with poisoned air, a community defined by resilience. Beneath its calm surface, the earth continues to whisper reminders of its power, and each morning, as residents step outside and test the air before removing their masks, they are reminded that here, survival is not taken for granted. It is practiced, one breath at a time. Halfway between Antarctica and Africa, Bouvet is a frozen wasteland claimed by Norway. No harbour, no permanent station, just glaciers and storms. Yet satellite images once showed an abandoned lifeboat on its shore. No one ever found who left it there. In the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, where the waves rise like mountains and the wind never stops, lies a place almost no one has ever seen in person. Bouvet Island, or Bouvetøya in Norwegian, is the most isolated landmass on Earth. The nearest continent, Antarctica, lies over 1,600 kilometers away. To the north, Africa is nearly 2,600 kilometers distant. Between them stretches an ocean so vast and violent that even supply ships rarely dare to cross it. Yet there, shrouded in fog and encased in ice, stands this tiny triangle of volcanic rock, uninhabited, unwelcoming, and utterly mysterious. Discovered in 1739 by the French explorer Jean-Baptiste Bouvet de Lozier, the island was so difficult to reach that for nearly a century afterward, no one could find it again. Early navigators argued about its very existence. Some marked it incorrectly on maps, while others dismissed it as a myth. It wasn't until 1825 that British explorers finally confirmed its location, describing it as a cliff rising straight from the sea, smothered in mist and birds. Norway formally claimed it in 1927 and later declared it a nature reserve, a designation that remains to this day. Bouvet is only 49 square kilometers in size, and nearly all of it is covered by a glacier. Sheer cliffs surround the island on every side, making landing nearly impossible. There are no trees, no soil, and no animals beyond the seabirds and seals that cling to its edges. Temperatures rarely rise above freezing, and winds can reach 200 kilometers per hour. For most of the year, Bouvet is enveloped in a blizzard of ice crystals and sea spray, a place seemingly designed to repel all life. Yet in 1964, something inexplicable appeared. A British Royal Navy survey ship, HMS Protector, captured aerial photographs of Bouvet that revealed an object on its western shore. A small wooden lifeboat, half buried in snow. Nearby lay a single oar, a fuel drum, and no footprints. The nearest shipping lane was over 1,000 kilometers away, and no vessels had been reported missing in the area. When researchers returned 2 years later, the lifeboat was gone, swept away, buried, or perhaps reclaimed by the sea. No human presence has ever been confirmed there before or since. Theories abound. Some suggest it was left by a whaling crew or a research team forced to abandon their craft. Others whisper of Cold War secrets, a failed intelligence mission perhaps, or a test gone wrong. The Norwegian Polar Institute investigated, finding no trace of habitation, no wreckage, and no records of any landing. To this day, the identity of whoever or whatever came ashore remains unsolved. Modern expeditions to Bouvet are rare and dangerous. The island has no harbour, and ships must anchor offshore while helicopters brave the winds to land equipment. Even Norway's automated weather station, installed in the 1970 seconds, has been destroyed repeatedly by storms. Researchers describe it as the loneliest weather post on the planet. Seen from space, Bouvet looks almost unreal, a speck of white surrounded by endless blue, like a snowflake drifting over the ocean. It endures as a symbol of isolation, a place where human presence feels temporary and nature is absolute. And yet, somewhere beneath the ice and silence, the mystery of that lone lifeboat remains, a faint echo of life in a place not meant for it. For now, Bouvet stands untouched, the world's last true nowhere, an island at the edge of everything. Hidden in the East River, just beyond Manhattan's skyline, lies an island where the city sent its sick. Typhoid Mary died here, alone in isolation. Today, the crumbling hospital is sealed by law claimed by vines and birds. Few places in New York are as close to the city's heart, yet as utterly forgotten as North Brother Island, nestled between the Bronx and Rikers Island. This small, tree-choked patch of land once represented both hope and fear, a barrier between the living and the dying. For nearly a century, it served as one of America's most infamous quarantine stations, a place where disease was confined, studied, and quietly buried. The story of North Brother Island begins in 1885, during an age when epidemics defined city life. Typhoid, smallpox, and tuberculosis ravaged New York's crowded tenements, spreading through the streets faster than medicine could follow. To protect the population, city officials established Riverside Hospital on the island, a facility accessible only by boat. The idea was simple: remove the infected from the city, and the city might survive. But for those sent there, it was a life sentence. The island's most famous resident was Mary Mallon, known to history as Typhoid Mary. A cook who carried Salmonella typhi without symptoms, she infected dozens of families across New York in the early 1900s. After multiple outbreaks were traced back to her, Mallon was forcibly quarantined on North Brother Island in 1907. She lived in a small cottage near the hospital grounds, surrounded by the skyline she could never return to. She spent over 2 decades there before dying in 1938, her ashes buried nearby. Her story became a symbol of public health's uneasy balance between individual freedom and collective safety. A debate that still echoes today, but Mallon was only one among thousands. Over the years, the island's wards filled with victims of scarlet fever, polio, and tuberculosis. Nurses and doctors worked under constant threat of infection, their windows facing the glittering city just out of reach. When antibiotics finally arrived in the mid-20th century, the need for quarantine waned, and Riverside Hospital closed in the 1950 seconds. For a brief time afterward, the island found a new purpose. The city converted the abandoned hospital into housing for young veterans returning from World War II. But isolation proved too strong a legacy. By the 1960 seconds, the island had fallen silent once again. Buildings decayed, roofs collapsed, and trees split through the concrete floors of the old wards. Nature reclaimed the corridors where nurses once walked. Today, North Brother Island is off limits to the public, its ruins protected as a bird sanctuary. The decaying hospital now shelters herons and egrets instead of patients. In summer, the air hums with insects and the cry of seabirds. In winter, the river freezes around it, locking the island in a silence as complete as death. From the Bronx shoreline, you can still glimpse the remains of brick stairways leading nowhere, their edges swallowed by ivy. The city that once feared disease now fears to disturb the island's past. Environmental scientists who study its fragile ecosystem tread carefully among the fallen walls, noting how quickly the land has reverted to wilderness. They call it urban ruin ecology, a living experiment in what happens when humanity steps back and nature takes over. At night, when the tide laps against the piers and the lights of Manhattan shimmer just beyond, North Brother Island stands as a reflection of a time when New York battled unseen enemies, not crime or poverty, but contagion. And though the ferries still pass within sight, none ever stop. Between 1946 and 1958, 23 nuclear explosions turned this coral ring into a radioactive desert. Decades later, coconut crabs still register unsafe radiation levels. Tourists may visit, but not stay. Far out in the central Pacific, surrounded by waters of perfect turquoise, lies Bikini Atoll, a place both breathtaking and haunted. Once part of the Marshall Islands, it was home to a peaceful community of fishermen who lived from the reef and the coconut palms. Today, it stands as one of the most infamous symbols of the nuclear age, a tropical paradise forever changed by the fire of man-made suns. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States sought a remote site to test its growing arsenal of atomic weapons. Bikini, isolated and sparsely populated, was chosen. In 1946, American officials arrived with promises of progress. They told the islanders that their displacement was temporary, that their sacrifice would help end all future wars. Trusting those words, the residents left their ancestral home. Boarding ships bound for other islands, they sang farewell songs as they sailed away, watching the palm-fringed horizon disappear behind them. They never returned. That same year, Operation Crossroads began. 2 bombs were detonated above and below the lagoon to test the effects of nuclear explosions on warships. Spectators watched from a distance as a blinding flash consumed the sky. The second blast, an underwater detonation codenamed Baker, produced a mushroom cloud of radioactive mist that coated everything it touched. The lagoon turned milky white. Ships anchored nearby American destroyers, submarines, and captured German and Japanese vessels were hurled like toys. The spectacle marked the beginning of an era defined by awe and fear. Over the next 12 years, the United States conducted 21 more tests at Bikini. Among them was Castle Bravo in 1954, the largest nuclear explosion ever detonated by the US, with a yield of 15 megatons. The blast vaporized 3 islands and carved a crater more than a mile wide. The fallout spread far beyond the atoll, drifting over nearby islands and exposing entire communities to radiation. Fishermen aboard the Japanese vessel Lucky Dragon No, 500 kilometers away, suffered severe radiation poisoning. The world's understanding of nuclear contamination and its horror changed forever. When the tests finally ended in 1958, Bikini lay silent. The once lush palms were stripped bare. The coral reef was bleached, its life extinguished. Cleanup efforts began in the 1,970 seconds, and for a time, radiation levels appeared to decline. A handful of residents attempted to return, but within years, studies found dangerously high levels of cesium 137 inches the soil and food chain. The coconut crabs, a local delicacy, showed radiation readings several times above safe limits. The government evacuated the returnees again, leaving behind empty houses and abandoned churches beneath the palms. Today, the atoll remains uninhabited. The lagoon is still, the waters eerily calm, concealing the rusting wrecks of warships at the bottom. Divers visit the site under strict guidelines, exploring a ghost fleet preserved by radiation and time. From the surface, the islands appear peaceful, a ring of green against an endless blue sea. But Geiger counters tell another story. The people of Bikini now live scattered across the Marshall Islands, many still identifying themselves as I Kiribati Bikinian, the displaced of a paradise that no longer exists. Their homeland glows faintly in satellite images, a scar on the ocean, beautiful and dangerous. When the wind moves across the lagoon, it carries a silence unlike anywhere else on Earth. A silence that remembers fire. In the sub-Antarctic, Heard Island burns beneath glaciers. Its volcano, Big Ben, erupts under sheets of ice, sending ash into frozen winds. Only scientists under strict permit may land, and even they risk being stranded for months. More than 4,000 kilometers southwest of Australia, in the lonely waters of the Indian Ocean, lies one of the most remote and hostile islands on Earth. Heard Island, a crescent of black rock and ice surrounded by storm-lashed seas, is a place few humans have ever seen, and even fewer have set foot on. Here, the elements wage a constant war. Glaciers crack like thunder while molten lava pushes upward from the Earth's core. It is a world where opposites collide. Snow falling over fire, ice melting into steam. At the island's heart rises Big Ben, a massive stratovolcano that towers 2,745 meters above sea level. It is the highest mountain in Australian territory, and one of the only known volcanoes on Earth that erupts beneath a permanent ice cap. From a distance, its slopes appear peaceful, a frozen cathedral of white and grey, but satellite imagery tells a different story. Red-hot magma pulses beneath the ice, carving channels through glaciers that have flowed for centuries. When the volcano erupts, it does so silently at first, steam and ash escaping through fissures before exploding into the sky. The contrast is breathtaking. Plumes of smoke twisting through blizzards, fire glowing under a canopy of snow. The island's extreme isolation has preserved it in a state few places on Earth still possess. There are no harbours, no airstrips, and no permanent settlements. The surrounding seas are some of the roughest in the world, with waves that can reach 12 metres and winds that howl at over 100 kilometres per hour. The only way to reach Heard Island is by ship, a 2-week voyage from Australia's Fremantle port, and even then, landing depends entirely on weather that can change from calm to catastrophic in minutes. For scientists, Heard Island is a living laboratory, one of the last pristine ecosystems left untouched by human industry. Expeditions come rarely and under strict environmental permits. Researchers study everything from volcanic activity to the island's unique wildlife. Colonies of king penguins that march in endless lines across black sand beaches, seals resting beside steaming vents, and mosses that grow where glaciers have only recently retreated. The land itself is in flux, constantly reshaped by both lava and ice, yet beauty here comes with danger. The volcano's eruptions, though infrequent, can alter the landscape overnight. In 2016, satellites recorded new lava flows stretching nearly 2 kilometers down. Big Ben's flank, melting deep channels into the ice. Scientists monitoring from offshore vessels described the glow as a wound in the snow. Meanwhile, the island's glaciers, once thought immovable, are shrinking faster than predicted, a stark reminder of the planet's warming trend, even in this frozen realm. Those who visit speak of Heard Island with reverence. The silence is overwhelming, broken only by the crack of carving ice or the distant rumble of the volcano. The smell of sulphur mixes with sea salt and the chill of Antarctic wind. It is a place that feels ancient, untouched by civilization, yet alive with the raw pulse of the earth. When storms rise, ships are forced to retreat, sometimes leaving researchers stranded for weeks. Communication is limited, and rescue is uncertain. But for those who endure, the experience borders on the spiritual. To stand on a glacier that hides a volcano, to watch fire breathe beneath ice. Few places on Earth capture the fragility and ferocity of nature so completely. Heard Island remains forbidden to all but the most determined, a reminder that even in the age of satellites and science, there are still corners of the world ruled by the elements alone. 26 miles off San Francisco, beneath the fog, lies a naval dump site where barrels of nuclear waste rest on the ocean floor. Entry is prohibited. Sonar shows shapes no diver is allowed to confirm. The Farallon Islands are easy to miss, a jagged cluster of rocks rising from the Pacific like the bones of a drowned world. From the mainland, they appear only as dark silhouettes through the fog, distant and unreachable. But beneath those waves lies one of the most unsettling chapters of America's post-war history, a secret graveyard of radioactive waste, sealed in rusting steel drums that no one dares to recover. Between 1946 and 1970, the waters west of the Golden Gate became an unofficial dumping ground for the US Navy and Atomic Energy Commission. At the height of the Cold War, disposal of nuclear byproducts was poorly regulated, and the deep Pacific seemed a convenient solution. Barges carried thousands of barrels filled with low-level radioactive waste, mostly contaminated tools, medical isotopes, and reactor components, and dropped them into the sea around the Farallon Islands. Official records mention 47,800 barrels. Later estimates suggested the number could be much higher. No one kept precise coordinates. The barrels were simply pushed overboard, their contents sinking to the ocean floor or, in some cases, floating just below the surface for weeks before finally rupturing. Fishermen in the 1,950 seconds reported glowing slicks spreading across the water and dead seabirds washing ashore. At the time, the government assured the public that the materials posed no measurable danger. Few believed it then. Even fewer do now. In the decades that followed, divers and marine researchers began mapping the seafloor near the islands. What they found shocked them. Scattered across a 1,200 square kilometre stretch of seabed were thousands of cylindrical shapes, rusted, broken, and half buried in sediment. Some rested at depths of 900 metres, others near steep underwater cliffs. In certain areas, radiation levels were found to be up to 50 times higher than the surrounding ocean, but the exact number and condition of the barrels remain unknown. The US government officially declared the site too dangerous and too costly to clean up. The Farallons themselves are a paradox, both forbidden and vital. They are home to massive colonies of seabirds and sea lions, and the surrounding waters serve as feeding grounds for great white sharks. The islands are protected as part of the Farallon National Wildlife Refuge, with access strictly limited to scientists. Even they are warned not to approach certain coordinates without clearance. The sea around the islands, cold and deceptively calm, hides both life and legacy, a coexistence born from secrecy. Modern sonar imagery has revealed strange patterns near the dump site, clusters of objects that appear to have fused together over time, possibly by corrosion or pressure. Some look like collapsed containers, others like metallic reefs now colonized by marine life. Divers are forbidden to confirm their nature, not only because of radiation risks, but because any disturbance could release toxic material trapped for decades beneath layers of silt. Environmental groups continue to push for transparency. In 2020, oceanographers from Stanford and NOAA conducted a drone-based mapping survey, confirming that thousands of barrels still remain intact. Their findings reignited old fears that slow leaks could one day contaminate the Bay Area's waters. Yet no cleanup plan exists. The site is officially classified as contained by depth. On foggy mornings, fishermen who still work the outer waters speak of dead zones, places where no fish rise, where the sonar hums oddly, and where the water seems thicker than it should be. Scientists call these anomalies acoustic shadows, but locals use a simpler term: the silent grave. The Farallon Islands are off-limits to nearly everyone, but if you stand on the Marin headlands at sunset and look west, you might glimpse them through the mist, dark, distant, and perfectly still. Beneath them, thousands of forgotten barrels rest quietly on the seafloor, a reminder that some secrets were never meant to surface. Once a secret chemical weapons factory, Okunoshima produced tons of lethal gas during World War II. Now, only rabbits roam its ruins, descendants, some say, of lab experiments. Off the coast of Hiroshima Prefecture, surrounded by calm blue waters, lies a small island that seems almost idyllic. Visitors arriving today see gentle hills, green forests, and hundreds of rabbits hopping freely across the grass. They nuzzle tourists for food and bask in the sun, earning Okunoshima the nickname Usagi-shima, Rabbit Island. But beneath the surface of this cheerful facade lies a much darker history. Less than a century ago, these same slopes hid one of the most secret and deadly military installations in Imperial Japan. In the 1922, Japan began expanding its arsenal in preparation for war. Among the most devastating weapons it developed was poison gas. Seeking a location remote enough for secrecy but close enough for transport, military planners chose Okunoshima, a small island roughly 2 miles in circumference, isolated yet within reach of Hiroshima's industrial centers. Construction began in 1927 under strict orders of silence. Workers were told the site was a simple power plant. In reality, it was a top-secret chemical weapons factory producing mustard gas, phosgene, and lewisite substances capable of burning lungs, skin, and eyes within seconds of contact. The operation ran around the clock. Inside the factory's concrete chambers, laborers mixed chemicals by hand, wearing little more than cloth masks and aprons. Many developed chronic illnesses, their lungs scarred from inhaling toxic vapors. Waste chemicals were dumped directly into the sea or buried in shallow pits. By 1939, Okunoshima was manufacturing thousands of tons of poison gas annually, much of it shipped to China, where it was used on battlefields despite international treaties banning chemical warfare. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Allied forces discovered the factory and ordered all records destroyed. To conceal its existence, the government erased Okunoshima from maps entirely. The remaining gas stockpiles were dumped, burned, or sealed underground. For decades afterward, the island remained closed, its contaminated soil and ruins left to decay in silence. Locals called it Dokugasu-shima, the poison gas island. Then something unexpected happened. Rabbits, likely descendants of those once used in lab experiments, began to multiply. Some were released after the war, others may have swum ashore from nearby islands. Without predators, they flourished. Within years, they transformed Okunoshima into a living symbol of innocence, reclaiming a place once defined by death. Today, tourists arrive by ferry to see the rabbits, unaware that they play on ground still haunted by its past. Rusting factory foundations remain scattered across the island, concrete bunkers, half-collapsed tunnels, and storage tanks still stained with chemical residue. The old power station has been converted into the Poison Gas Museum, where visitors learn how the weapons were made and what they did to those who handled them. Exhibits display corroded gas masks, laboratory equipment, and heartbreaking testimonies from survivors who worked in the facility as young men and women. Despite cleanup efforts, parts of the island remain unsafe to dig. Scientists monitor air and water quality to ensure no contamination leaks into surrounding seas. Entry to certain tunnels and bunkers is strictly prohibited, sealed under layers of earth. Yet the rabbits thrive, seemingly unbothered by the island's history, grazing where workers once mixed chemicals in gas-filled chambers. From a distance, Okunoshima looks peaceful, a postcard of nature's recovery. But the silence carries weight. Beneath the laughter of tourists and the rustle of grass, the wind moves through the ruins of a place once erased from memory. The rabbits, soft and unknowing, are the island's living witnesses, reminders that even the gentlest beauty can grow from the darkest soil. Charts once marked it near the Miyake archipelago. Then it vanished from modern maps. Fishermen claim their compasses spin near its supposed location. The government denies it exists. Along Myanmar's southern coast, the Andaman Sea stretches out in a maze of islands, hundreds of forested specks scattered like emeralds across turquoise water. The region, known as the Miyake archipelago, is one of the least explored corners of Southeast Asia. Many of its islands remain unnamed, uninhabited, and uncharted. But among them, there's one that doesn't appear at all anymore, a place once drawn on maritime charts as Snake Island. Today, its coordinates lead to open water. Old British naval records from the late 19th century describe a small rocky island inhabited almost entirely by serpents. Early surveyors warned of unusual magnetic disturbances that interfered with navigation. Their journals mention dense jungle, quicksand-like mud, and hundreds of snakes coiled along the shore. Local Moken sailors, nomadic sea gypsies who have navigated these waters for centuries, told stories of boats running aground there and never returning. Some said the snakes were sacred guardians of buried relics from an ancient kingdom lost beneath the sea. Others believed the island itself moved, appearing and disappearing with the tides. After World War II, Snake Island appeared on regional maps under several names: Kyaik Khan Kyun and later Tharawadi Shoal, before being quietly removed in the 1972. When modern satellite surveys of the Miyake archipelago began, the coordinates marked nothing but deep water. Some dismissed it as a cartographic error, a misplaced reef or sandbank erased by storms. But to the fishermen of Taninthari, its absence was something else entirely. They say the island still exists, hidden in fog and currents, visible only to those who stray too close. Stories persist of strange phenomena near its location. compass needles spinning aimlessly, boat radios picking up bursts of static that sound like hissing, sudden changes in depth sonar readings jumping from 50 meters to 0, then back again. Several fishing trawlers have reported losing power for minutes at a time when crossing those waters, their engines restarting only after drifting away. One captain described seeing a shimmer on the horizon like land beneath glass before his instruments failed completely. In 2008, a Myanmar marine research team attempted to locate the island using sonar and satellite imaging. The expedition reported no landmass, but did record unexplained magnetic anomalies in a 5-kilometer radius, enough to disrupt compasses and small engines. Officially, the findings were classified as inconclusive. Shortly after, the government declared the surrounding zone a restricted maritime area, citing environmental sensitivity. To this day, no independent survey has been allowed there. Scientists offer a few possibilities. Some suggest volcanic or ferromagnetic rock formations beneath the seabed could distort magnetic fields. Others propose methane seeps pockets of gas that rise and alter buoyancy, creating the illusion of land while disabling electronics. But none of these theories explain why Snake Island once appeared consistently on nautical charts for nearly a century, or why it was later erased entirely. Fishermen continue to treat the coordinates with superstition. They sail wide around the area, marking the water with offerings, bits of rice, betel leaf, and coins to appease what they call the Naga Kyun, the Serpent Island. Some whisper that it sank during a cyclone, dragging its serpents into the depths. Others believe it remains invisible by design, protected by forces older than the sea itself. When storms roll through the archipelago, the horizon fills with lightning that splits the sky in green flashes. Sometimes, sailors say, those flashes reveal the outline of an island that shouldn't be there, dark, curved, alive. And then, just as quickly, it's gone. Whether Snake Island ever truly existed or was simply a myth born of fear and magnetic chance, no one can say for certain. But in a region where the ocean still hides ancient temples and sunken cities, the absence of proof may mean little. Near the Roaring Forties, sailors report radio blackouts and magnetic drift. Every attempt to establish a research base ends in failure. Instruments die, cameras fog, then silence. Far south, where the Pacific collides with the Indian Ocean, lies a region sailors call the Roaring Forties, a belt of wind and water that never rests. Waves rise like cliffs, and storms circle the globe endlessly, unimpeded by land. Somewhere within this chaos, between the remote Kerguelen Plateau and the southern reaches of New Zealand, lie the Albatross Isles, a small, shifting cluster of landmasses that appear only briefly on satellite scans before vanishing again. Yet mariners still speak of them in whispers. Islands where no signal works, where engines falter, and where the sky itself seems to hum. The first record of the Albatross Isles dates to 1929, when a Norwegian whaling ship, Ostfjord, reported grounding on a barren spit of volcanic rock surrounded by boiling seas. The crew managed to free the vessel, but their compasses spun wildly and their radio failed for nearly 12 hours. When they plotted their position later, the coordinates placed them hundreds of kilometers from any known island. For decades afterward, similar accounts trickled in radio operators picking up distorted Morse signals from uncharted locations, or ships momentarily losing communication before reappearing on radar as if nothing had happened. In the 1,960 seconds, with Cold War tensions at their height, several nations attempted to locate the Isles using reconnaissance flights. None returned. With proof, pilots described severe turbulence, sudden instrument failure, and what one Australian aviator called a wall of static. Photographs from one such flight showed nothing but featureless grey fog, yet analysis revealed faint geometric patterns within the cloud, as if something solid were hidden beneath it. Modern science has offered few answers. The region is notorious for magnetic anomalies caused by variations in the Earth's crust. ancient volcanic ridges and iron-rich seafloor deposits that can distort compasses and interfere with radio frequencies. But that doesn't explain the repeated equipment malfunctions reported over the years. In 1999, a French oceanographic survey vessel, Marion Dufresne II, recorded abrupt drops in temperature and sonar echoes resembling land masses rising from the seabed. When they returned to the same coordinates days later, the echoes were gone. Theories abound. Some oceanographers believe the Albatross Isles are remnants of a submerged plateau, fragments of a long-lost microcontinent that occasionally breach the surface during tectonic shifts. Others suspect localized electromagnetic disturbances, perhaps caused by hydrothermal vents or undersea volcanoes releasing charged gases into the atmosphere. More speculative minds speak of atmospheric lensing, a rare phenomenon that bends light and radar, creating illusions of islands that aren't really there. But among sailors, the explanation is simpler and older. They say the Albatross Isles are cursed. For centuries, albatrosses have been seen circling the area in vast numbers, their white wings glowing in the gloom. Maritime superstition holds that these birds carry the souls of drowned sailors. Some captains claim that when their radios die, they hear faint sounds through the static, not noise, but whispers or the creak of distant rigging. No country claims ownership of the region, and no permanent expedition has ever succeeded in landing. Attempts to establish automated buoys or weather stations have failed. Every instrument sent there either malfunctions or disappears within weeks. Even satellites struggle, images blur, distort, or return blank. On maps, the coordinates are marked only as open sea. Still, once in a while, passing ships report strange readings, a sudden warmth in the air, a moment of complete calm. Then, just before the storm returns, a shape on the horizon, cliffs black as obsidian, swarmed with seabirds, rising briefly from the roaring waves. And then, as quickly as it appears, it's gone. Whether the Albatross Isles are a trick of magnetism, a mirage of nature, or a forgotten scrap of land swallowed by time, no one can say. But those who sail the roaring 40s still steer clear, unwilling to risk their radios going silent in the loneliest seas on Earth. On Enewetak Atoll, a massive concrete dome hides 85,000 cubic meters of radioactive debris. Locals call it the tomb. Cracks are spreading and seawater seeps through. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where palm trees sway above turquoise lagoons, lies a monument to one of humanity's darkest experiments. The Runit dome, known to locals as the Tomb, sits like a grey blister on the edge of paradise. From above, it looks almost serene, a perfect concrete circle resting on the sand framed by the endless blue of Enewetak Atoll. But beneath that dome lies the residue of 43 nuclear explosions, a graveyard of plutonium, ash, and secrets buried beneath only a few feet of cement. Between 1948 and 1958, the United States used the Marshall Islands as a testing ground for its most powerful weapons. More than 60 atomic and hydrogen bombs were detonated across Bikini and Enewetak atolls, vaporizing entire islands and contaminating the surrounding ocean. The tests were meant to demonstrate power. Instead, they scarred the Pacific forever. When the program ended, the atoll was uninhabitable, its soil saturated with radioactive isotopes, its lagoons glowing faintly under Geiger counters. In the late 1970 seconds, under international pressure to clean up the fallout, the U.S. launched what became known as Operation Cleanup. Hundreds of American soldiers, mostly young men unaware of the risks, were sent to collect contaminated soil, debris, and chunks of fused coral left from the detonations. Wearing minimal protection, they worked in intense heat, bulldozing radioactive waste into craters left by earlier explosions. The largest of these craters, on Runit Island, measured 110 meters wide and 9 meters deep. It became the perfect pit for burial. Over 3 years, workers filled the crater with more than 85,000 cubic meters of radioactive material, including soil from other test sites, remains of detonated equipment, and, according to some accounts, plutonium-contaminated scrap from Nevada. When it was full, they sealed it with a concrete cap 45 centimeters thick. A dome made of 358 panels, each hand-poured under the Pacific Sunday. In 1980, the project was declared complete. Officials described the structure as safe, a permanent containment solution. But no lining was ever placed beneath it. The waste sits directly on porous coral, open to the sea below. 4 decades later, the cracks began to show. Satellite images reveal fissures spreading across the dome's surface, widened by heat and storms. Local residents report seeing seawater rising through the floor after high tides, a sign that the Pacific is already seeping in and possibly that radiation is seeping out. The US Department of Energy has since confirmed that plutonium levels in the surrounding lagoon remain elevated. Yet, responsibility for maintaining the dome is disputed. Washington claims it was built for the Marshallese, while the Marshall Islands government insists it was America's waste to contain. Scientists warn that climate change could turn the tomb into a slow-motion disaster. Each year, typhoons grow stronger, battering the fragile concrete shell. If the dome fails completely, radioactive material long thought contained could leach into the Pacific, spreading across ocean currents that touch coastlines from Asia to the Americas. For the Marshallese people, the tomb is more than an environmental threat. It's a symbol of betrayal. Many of their ancestors were relocated before the nuclear tests began, promised safety and a chance to return. Most never did. Those who live nearby still suffer high rates of cancer and birth defects linked to radiation exposure. To them, Runit Dome isn't just a structure, it's a wound that never healed. Standing at its edge, the silence is almost unreal. There are no fences, no warning signs, only the sound of wind sweeping across the concrete and waves breaking against coral. Beneath your feet lies the legacy of an age when nations believed the ocean could hide anything, even their sins. The cracks widen each year, the sea rises inch by inch, and the tomb endures not as a monument to victory, but as a reminder of what power, once unleashed, refuses to stay buried. Fishermen once described a sister island off Lampedusa's coast. It appeared after storms, then sank again beneath the waves. Modern sonar finds no trace, only shifting seabed shadows. Between Sicily and Tunisia, where the Mediterranean narrows into a corridor of blue, lies the island of Lampedusa, a windswept fragment of limestone surrounded by waters that have carried ships, refugees, and legends for centuries. Yet those who have sailed these seas speak of another island, once seen near its coast, a phantom land that rose from the sea, glimmered under the sun, and then vanished without a trace. Some called it Lampedusa's twin, others Ferdinandia, or simply the island that would not stay. The earliest accounts come from 1831, when sailors in the Sicilian Channel reported explosions beneath the sea. Over several days, the water boiled and plumes of smoke rose skyward. By the end of the week, a new island had formed a black cone of volcanic ash and rock jutting nearly 60 meters above the waves. British naval vessels arrived first, naming it Graham Island and raising the Union Jack. Within days, the French claimed it as Ile Julia, and the Sicilians asserted their own sovereignty. For a brief moment, this barren strip of earth became the focus of 3 nations, a geopolitical contest for land that, unknown to all of them, was already dying. The island's birth was the result of a submarine volcanic eruption, part of a chain that runs through the Mediterranean's tectonic fault line. Its material was fragile, loose pumice and ash fused by heat but easily eroded by the sea. Within months, waves began tearing it apart. By early 1832, Graham Island had crumbled back into the depths, leaving only shallow reefs and a lingering name on the maps. Yet, the legend didn't fade. For decades afterward, sailors reported strange sightings, a shadow rising from the water, or the smell of sulphur drifting across the wind. In the early 20th century, fishermen from Lampedusa claimed that after certain storms the island reappeared low, dark and steaming before sinking once more. Some swore they'd walked its shore. Others found stones blackened as if by fire. Scientists dismissed the claims as mirages or patches of floating pumice. But when sonar mapping of the Mediterranean began in the 1980 seconds, researchers discovered something unsettling. A submerged volcanic structure, exactly where the old charts had marked it, rising from a depth of 200 meters to within 8 meters of the surface. They named it Empedocles, after the Greek philosopher who, according to legend, leapt into a volcano to prove his divinity. The seamount is massive, nearly 30 kilometers across, a hidden giant sleeping beneath the waves. Its central vent still releases gas bubbles and traces of heat, proof that the earth beneath Lampedusa is very much alive. Experts warn that another eruption could, at any time, bring the island back again, only to erase it once more. Today, nothing marks the spot but restless waves. Divers report that the seabed shifts constantly, covered in strange ripples of volcanic sand that move like breath. On calm days, the water above the site shimmers with a faint distortion, as if light bends differently there. Local fishermen still avoid the area, steering their boats wide. They say their nets tear when cast too close, snagged on rock that wasn't there before. To the people of Lampedusa, the legend of the disappearing island is more than a curiosity. It's a reminder of how unstable the world beneath their feet truly is. How even land, the thing we trust most, can vanish overnight. Every few decades, seismographs register tremors beneath the Sicilian Channel. Each one reignites whispers that Lampedusa's twin may rise again, and when the sea turns dark and begins to boil, perhaps it will, a fleeting island born of fire, destined to sink back into silence. In 1974, a yacht vanished after anchoring near Palmyra. Only fragments were found, coated in blood. Since then, sailors avoid its turquoise lagoon, calling it an island that watches. Far out in the central Pacific, nearly halfway between Hawaii and Samoa, lies Palmyra Atoll, a crescent of coral and palm trees encircling a lagoon so beautiful it looks almost unreal. From above, it appears as a perfect ring of turquoise light floating in an endless blue sea. Yet behind that postcard serenity lies a history so unsettling that even seasoned sailors hesitate to approach. Palmyra, they say, is cursed, a place where luck dies, compasses falter, and those who linger too long are never quite the same. The atoll's story begins in the early 19th century, when American whaling ships first charted it. Uninhabited and lush with coconut palms, Palmyra was occasionally visited by passing crews but never settled. The isolation was complete more than 1,000 miles from the nearest major port, surrounded by reefs that could shred a hull in seconds. Over the years, rumours spread among sailors, strange lights over the lagoon, wrecked ships appearing overnight, and an eerie quiet that seemed to swallow sound. But the legend of Palmyra's curse truly took hold in 1974, when a couple from San Diego, Mac and Muff Graham, sailed their yacht, Sea Wind, into the atoll's calm harbour. They planned to stay for a few weeks, exploring the Pacific before returning home. Several other travellers were anchored nearby, including a drifter named Buck Walker and his girlfriend, who were stranded after their boat engine failed. Tensions simmered between the couples as supplies dwindled. Then, one night, the Sea Wind vanished. Months later, fragments of the yacht washed ashore, pieces of fiberglass, a dinghy, and a metal fuel tank smeared with what investigators described as reddish stains. Years passed before the truth surfaced. In 1981, 2 skeletal remains were found buried in the sand, bound with wire. Forensic analysis suggested they belonged to the missing sailors. Buck Walker was later convicted of murder. But even then, many questions remained unanswered: why the yacht was stripped, why parts of the wreck seemed deliberately scattered, and why witnesses reported hearing cries across the lagoon on the night it disappeared. Since then, Palmyra has gained a reputation as one of the most haunted places in the Pacific. Divers report mechanical failures as soon as they enter the lagoon. Radios cut to static. Metal tools corrode in hours. Some describe a feeling of being watched, as though the dense jungle, alive with seabirds and crabs, is somehow aware of their presence. Others speak of an unnatural stillness at dusk, when even the wind dies and the water turns mirror flat, reflecting nothing but the crimson sky. Scientists attribute the strange atmosphere to the island's isolation and its ecosystem. Palmyra is home to one of the most pristine coral reefs on Earth, protected as a U.S. National Wildlife Refuge. Its air is heavy with ozone and salt, its soil rich in guano elements that can interfere with electronics. The curse, they say, is nothing more than natural forces at work in an untouched environment. But for those who've spent nights there, the explanation feels hollow. Wreckage still litters the reef's fragments of forgotten ships from every era. The jungle has swallowed the remnants of wartime bunkers and an abandoned airstrip built by the U.S. Navy during World War II. Nature has reclaimed everything, turning human history into ruins wrapped in vines. Today, access to Palmyra is heavily restricted. Only scientists and conservation teams with government clearance are allowed ashore. One researcher wrote in his field log, "It feels alive, but not in a way that welcomes you. When the sun sets and the lagoon glows silver under the moonlight, the stillness returns. No voices, no surf, no sound, just an endless reflection of the sky, hiding the memory of those who never made it home." Wreckage from missing flight MH370 washed ashore here in 2015. Locals recall earlier debris unexplained, unclaimed long before that tragedy. Some call it the graveyard of flight paths. In the Indian Ocean, east of Madagascar, lies the French island of Réunion, a land of contrasts. To the west, lush forests and sugarcane fields stretch toward the sea. To the east, the coastline turns black and molten, carved by one of the most active volcanoes on Earth. Piton de la Fournaise, the Furnace Peak. Here, fire meets ocean, a new land is constantly born. Yet this same coast, remote, jagged and unforgiving, has earned another reputation. A place where things lost to the sky return to the sea. In July 2015, a local beachcomber named Johnny Begay found a barnacle-encrusted piece of debris on the island's southern shore. It was a flaperon, part of a Boeing 777's wing. Within weeks, investigators confirmed it belonged to Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, the aircraft that had vanished the previous year en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing with 239 people aboard. The discovery reignited global fascination and grief. But for residents of Réunion, it was not the first time the ocean had carried wreckage to their shores. Long before MH370's tragedy, fishermen along the lava coast had reported finding strange fragments after storms, metallic panels, bits of wiring, even a landing gear wheel. Most were dismissed as remnants of maritime equipment or old crashes lost to record, but patterns persisted. The debris always came from the same stretch of shoreline, a place where volcanic rock meets deep water, where currents from half the world seem to converge. Locals began calling it La Côte du Feu, the Coast of Fire, and whispered that it drew in what the sea refused to keep. Geographically, Réunion sits at the heart of one of the most complex current systems on the planet. The South Equatorial Current sweeps from Australia toward Africa, funneled by the island's sheer cliffs and undersea ridges. Anything floating within thousands of kilometers, from a drifting container to an airplane part, can eventually wash up here. Oceanographers have since mapped the current's flow and confirmed that it acts like a conveyor belt of the Indian Ocean. But even so, the island's record of debris feels uncanny. Old archives from the 1950 seconds mention an unidentified aircraft fragment found near Saint Philippe. In 1962, a metal panel believed to be from a British transport plane surfaced after a cyclone. None were conclusively identified. Each was logged, speculated upon, and forgotten. And then, decades later, MH370's flaperon appeared as if to remind the world that the ocean forgets nothing. The lava coast itself is a place of eerie beauty. Waves crash against fields of black basalt still warm from eruptions, sending plumes of mist into the air. During heavy swells, the sea glows with bioluminescent plankton, turning the night into a shimmering mirror. Yet it's also treacherous. The undercurrents are violent, and the cliffs are razor-sharp. For years, locals have reported aircraft flying unusually low over the sea before disappearing into cloud banks, only for nothing to appear on radar afterward. Aviation authorities dismiss such sightings as optical illusions, mirages formed by heat, humidity, and light refracting off the ocean's surface. Still, the myths persist. Some islanders believe the volcano itself exerts a magnetic force, disrupting navigation systems. Others point to the same deep-sea trenches that swallow wrecks whole, never to be seen again. Scientists studying the seafloor near Réunion have confirmed a network of submerged ridges and pits nearly 5 kilometers deep, potential resting places for more than one lost flight. Today, visitors to Réunion's southern shore can still find traces of MH370's legacy. The waves continue their endless work, washing fragments of distant tragedies onto the black sand. The island remains what it has always been, a meeting point between creation and destruction, where molten rock builds new earth even as the sea delivers reminders of what was lost. In a world mapped and measured, Réunion's lava coast reminds us that some mysteries do not vanish. They simply drift until the tide decides to return them. The world's loneliest outpost, a French scientific station, stands alone in the Indian Ocean, 4,000 kilometers from any mainland. Access is limited to 2 supply ships per year. The rest is silence. In the heart of the southern Indian Ocean, far from any major landmass or flight path, lies Amsterdam Island, a speck of volcanic rock adrift in one of the most isolated places on Earth. Surrounded by endless grey seas and roaring winds, it is closer to Antarctica than to Africa, Australia, or Asia. On maps, it appears almost insignificant. Yet this remote outcrop supports one of humanity's most isolated communities. A handful of French scientists, meteorologists, and technicians who live in near-permanent exile to study the planet's changing climate. Known officially as Île Amsterdam, the island measures barely 55 square kilometers. From above, it resembles a blackened crown, steep cliffs encircling a high volcanic plateau covered in sparse grass and moss. The central peak, Mont de la Dives, rises more than 800 meters above sea level, often lost in clouds. Its slopes descend into ash-coloured plains scarred by old lava flows, remnants of eruptions long past. The coastline, rugged and uninviting, is lashed by waves that can rise 10 meters high, making landings perilous. There are no beaches, no harbours, and no permanent inhabitants beyond the small research base known as Martin de Viviers. Reaching Amsterdam Island is an ordeal in itself. There are no airports, and the nearest port in Réunion lies over 3,000 kilometers away. Twice a year, a French Navy vessel or a supply ship called the Marion Dufresne brings new personnel, food, and mail. The journey takes nearly 10 days, depending on weather. And once the ship departs, the crew is entirely cut off until its return. For months, there are no visitors, no internet beyond slow satellite links, and no contact except radio. Those stationed here describe time differently, marked not by days, but by wind patterns and the movements of seabirds. Despite its isolation, Amsterdam Island has played an important role in science. Since the 1950 seconds, researchers have maintained one of the world's most continuous meteorological records from this point, tracking air currents, greenhouse gases, and ocean temperatures that help model global climate systems. It is one of the few places in the southern hemisphere where long-term carbon dioxide data has been measured uninterrupted for decades. The scientists here live in Spartan quarters, surrounded by instruments, generators, and the vastness of the sea. The nights are long and wind-shaken, filled with the low hum of machinery and the cries of albatrosses echoing across the cliffs. The island's isolation has preserved its wildlife in near pristine condition. Thousands of seabirds, sooty albatrosses, petrels, and terns nest on the cliffs, while elephant seals haul themselves onto the rocky shores. The island's only native mammal, the Amsterdam albatross, breeds nowhere else on Earth. Fewer than 100 remain, making it one of the rarest birds alive. Scientists working here often describe the experience as stepping into another age, a glimpse of a world untouched by cities or traffic, where nature's rhythms still dominate. But life on Amsterdam is not romantic. The weather is relentless. Winds howl at over 100 kilometers per hour, and rain can fall for weeks without pause. Supplies must be rationed carefully. A broken generator or delayed ship can mean months without essentials. The isolation, combined with the monotony, tests even the most stoic minds. Many researchers speak of hearing the sea's voice in their sleep, or feeling watched by the emptiness itself, as if the island is aware of their intrusion. When the resupply ship finally returns, bringing mail, fruit, and faces from the outside world, it is both joy and farewell. Some stay another season. Others board and leave, knowing they may never return. From the deck, the island recedes into mist, a lonely fortress of rock and wind, still standing guard in the middle of the world's largest ocean. For the rest of the year, Amsterdam Island remains what it has always been, a whisper of land in an endless sea, where humanity's presence is fleeting and the silence never ends. Satellite logs show occasional heat signatures in the tundra, yet no permanent residents exist. Norway restricts landings officially for ecology, unofficially for unexplained anomalies. Halfway between Norway's mainland and the icy reaches of Svalbard lies Bjørnøya Bare Island, a desolate rock in the Barents Sea. It is shrouded in mist and mystery. Only 178 square kilometers in size, the island is lashed by constant gales and cloaked in near-permanent cloud cover. From a distance, it appears as a grey shadow on the horizon, rising from waters so cold they can kill a man in minutes. Though technically part of the Svalbard archipelago, Bare Island feels like a world apart, a place of silence, secrecy, and strange whispers carried on the Arctic wind. Its name comes from the first recorded encounter in 1596, when Dutch explorers led by Willem Barents sighted a polar bear swimming near shore. What they found was a barren land of cliffs, peat bogs, and bird colonies, harsh, lifeless, yet hauntingly beautiful. Over the centuries, it served as a waypoint for whalers and trappers, then briefly as a coal mining outpost in the early 20th century. The mines closed after several unexplained accidents and a catastrophic collapse in 1925 that killed dozens. Survivors spoke of tremors that came from nowhere, vibrations felt through the ground long before the collapse began. Since then, permanent settlement has been forbidden. Today, only a handful of meteorologists and radio operators inhabit the island for short periods, stationed at the remote Bjørnøya Meteorological Station near the north coast. Their job is to track Arctic weather and monitor the sea ice, but even they live under strict regulations. Access to the island is controlled by Norway's environmental authorities, and most of it is designated as a nature reserve. Officially, the restrictions exist to protect fragile ecosystems and bird nesting sites. Unofficially, the reasons appear far stranger. Satellite imagery from recent years has revealed intermittent thermal anomalies, pockets of unexplained heat deep within the island's interior. Far from any known structures or geothermal vents. During one winter in 2013, the European Space Agency detected a localized temperature spike equivalent to an underground fire lasting several hours. Though no smoke or surface disturbance was visible, when investigators cross-referenced the data, they found that similar spikes had occurred at irregular intervals for decades, always in roughly the same area. Field expeditions sent to examine the location have consistently reported equipment malfunctions. GPS signals flicker, compasses spin, drones lose contact within minutes of flight. In 2016, a small team of researchers attempting to map the thermal zone were forced to retreat when their instruments began overheating in sub-zero conditions. Their report, later leaked, mentioned a persistent metallic resonance audible beneath the wind, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The findings were never published. Norwegian authorities maintain that the anomalies are natural, the result of permafrost activity or ancient peat fires smouldering underground. Yet no confirmed samples or soil cores have ever been released for independent analysis. The restricted area remains off-limits, patrolled occasionally by the Coast Guard, which cites environmental protection as the standing order. Local fishermen from Tromsø and Svalbard, who pass near the island during long voyages, tell stories that sound like folklore but are repeated too often to ignore. They speak of strange lights over the cliffs, faint glows that dance just above the ground before vanishing into fog. Some claim their radios pick up faint transmissions in languages no one recognizes. Others say that when the sea is perfectly still, they can hear a hum beneath the water, like machinery deep below the surface. Bear Island has become a kind of Arctic enigma, a forbidden zone that blends science, secrecy, and myth. Few believe it hides anything extraordinary, yet no one can explain the recurring heat, the equipment failures, or the inexplicable sounds. Perhaps it is merely the earth shifting, the crust breathing beneath the ice. Or perhaps, as some of Norway's old sailors mutter, the island is not empty at all, just asleep, waiting beneath the frost. Deep in the Pacific, Rapa Iti's cliffs rise like fortress walls. Outsiders are unwelcome. Anthropologists who landed in 1957 found the island as hiding shrines to unknown gods and left before nightfall. At the far edge of French Polynesia, nearly 1,200 kilometers south of Tahiti, lies a place almost forgotten by the modern world. Rapa Iti. Little Rapa is a crescent-shaped island surrounded by cliffs that rise straight out of the sea, their black-green faces streaked with waterfalls and mist. From the air, it looks like a broken crown, its interior hidden by fog. To reach it, one must cross hundreds of miles of open ocean, braving unpredictable winds and reefs sharp enough to tear through steel. Few attempt the journey, and even fewer are welcomed ashore. Rapa Iti is often called the last fortress of Polynesia. Its people are descended from the same voyagers who once populated the vast Pacific, yet their culture evolved in near-total isolation. Anthropologists who visited during the mid-20th century described an island both beautiful and secretive. When a French expedition landed there in 1957, they found a society still governed by ancient hierarchies and rituals unseen elsewhere in Polynesia. The villagers greeted them politely, yet with unease, refusing to answer questions about certain hills and caves. When night fell, the researchers were advised to leave immediately, and they did. Their notes, later published in fragments, mentioned structures of stone concealed in jungle growth, dedicated to unnamed deities. Those ruins are real. Satellite images have since revealed clusters of stone terraces and ceremonial platforms buried beneath dense vegetation, some aligned with solstices, others pointing toward the sea. Archaeologists believe these are remnants of Marae sacred temples used for offerings and ancestor worship, yet a few of the sites appear far older than the known settlement period of the island, their stones weathered and blackened as if by great heat. When questioned, Locals simply say the shrines belong to the time before memory. Even today, visitors are rare and carefully monitored. French administrators occasionally send supply ships or medical teams, but outsiders are not allowed to roam freely. Journalists and documentary crews who have applied for access have often been denied, with the local council citing cultural preservation. Those who have managed to land describe an atmosphere of quiet suspicion. The island's 500 or so residents live in small villages along the coast, tending taro fields and fishing from the reefs. Electricity is limited, and communication with the outside world depends on a single satellite uplink that often fails. What makes Rapa-iti so enigmatic isn't hostility, it's secrecy. Elders tell stories of a past calamity that drove their ancestors to seal themselves away, cutting ties with neighbouring islands. Some versions speak of invaders from the north, others of a sickness brought by the sea. A few whisper of voices from beneath the waves, echoing through the cliffs on stormy nights. Whether myth or memory, the story has shaped Rapa-iti's identity for centuries. In recent years, drone images taken offshore have shown faint markings along one of the island's upper ridges, geometric carvings visible only in angled light. Researchers believe they may be ancient navigation symbols, perhaps carved when the Polynesians first arrived. But none have been studied closely. The ridge lies within a forbidden zone, protected by taboo. To outsiders, Rapa-iti remains an anthropological mystery, a microcosm of isolation where the past still governs the present. To its people, it is a sanctuary, guarded not by hostility but by reverence. When ships approach, villagers still light torches along the cliffs, a centuries-old signal meaning, "Do not land after dark." Whether that warning is tradition, superstition, or something more, no one knows. But those who have seen the island at sunset say the cliffs glow red in the dying light, as if the land itself remembers what it swore never to tell. South of New Zealand, Antipodes endures winds that exceed 200 kilometers per hour. No harbour, no rescue, and a history of shipwrecks frozen in time. Scientists visit once a decade, far below the roaring 40s, where the Southern Ocean churns endlessly, lies the Antipodes, a cluster of volcanic islands so remote and inhospitable that even the name speaks of distance. They are nearly as far from any human settlement as it's possible to be. A place where the sea and sky merge in grey fury, and where storms never seem to end. The nearest inhabited land is New Zealand, nearly 900 kilometres to the northwest. Everything between is water, vast, cold, and merciless. The Antipodes Islands are tiny, barely 21 square kilometres combined. Their cliffs rise like black teeth from the sea, carved by millennia of wind and waves. Landing here is nearly impossible. The waves batter the shore without rest, and the island's sheer basalt walls offer no natural harbour. Even on rare calm days, surf surges so violently that small boats risk being dashed to pieces. For that reason, the islands remain largely untouched. Only a few hardy researchers from the New Zealand Department of Conservation brave the journey, usually aboard ice-rated vessels that anchor offshore. When they come, they stay briefly days at most, before retreating ahead of the next storm front. The islands were discovered in 1800 by Captain Henry Waterhouse of HMS Reliance. Since then, fewer than 1,000 people have ever set foot there. Those who did rarely forgot it. Early sealing crews who tried to establish camps in the 19th century often met grim ends. Several wrecked ships left survivors stranded on the islands for months, living on penguins, seals, and whatever driftwood they could gather. The most infamous case was the Spirit of the Dawn, wrecked in 1893. 10 men reached shore, only 4 survived the winter. Their rescue came nearly a year later by chance, not by design. The remains of their camp still lie beneath moss and peat, preserved like a time capsule in the cold air. Today, the Antipodes are a protected World Heritage Site, officially part of New Zealand's subantarctic islands group. Yet even with satellite communication and modern navigation, the dangers remain the same. Winds here routinely exceed 200 kilometers per hour, strong enough to uproot equipment and flip steel barrels. Rain falls almost daily, driven sideways by the gales. The temperature rarely climbs above 10 degrees Celsius, and fog can blanket the entire island for weeks, turning day into a dim twilight. Despite this hostility, life thrives. The cliffs are home to vast colonies of penguins, Antipodean, and erect-crested species found nowhere else. Seals lounge on the rocky beaches, while albatrosses soar above, their wings slicing through the wind. Beneath the soil, the volcanic landscape hosts strange mosses and giant ferns that seem ancient, survivors from an age before humans. For biologists, the antipodes are a living laboratory, a glimpse into Earth's untouched ecosystems, but one that demands humility from anyone who dares to visit. Legends among sailors speak of lights seen through the fog, pale glows that dance above the cliffs during storms. Some believe they're reflections of lightning trapped in mist. Others call them southern lanterns, ghostly beacons from long-lost ships. 1,920 seconds fishing log even recorded human voices carried by wind, though no expedition ever confirmed such claims. The rational explanation lies in acoustics. The roar of the wind echoing off the cliffs distorted by the island's hollow rock formations. Still, the feeling of being watched, of something immense and unseen moving behind the veil of fog, is one every visitor describes. Few places on Earth are as utterly detached from civilization. There are no airports, no permanent structures beyond a small emergency shelter, and no possibility of rescue during most of the year. When the last scientists leave, the antipodes return to silence, a silence filled only by the crash of waves and the cries of seabirds. In a world shrinking under satellites and maps, the antipodes remain defiantly wild, a corner of the Earth still ruled by weather, memory, and the relentless voice of the sea. Between Jamaica and Haiti lies an uninhabited island watched by US patrols but claimed by neither nation. Old lighthouse records speak of workers who vanished without trace. In the Caribbean Sea, where the waters of the Windward Passage meet the open Atlantic, lies Navassa Island, a rocky, sun-scorched outcrop just 2 square miles in size. From above, it looks like a fortress rising from turquoise water, surrounded by cliffs too steep for safe landing. Yet this barren scrap of coral has carried a strange and troubled history. Claimed, abandoned, and disputed for centuries, a ghost of colonial ambition and forgotten violence. Navassa's story begins in 1857, when an obscure US law called the Guano Islands Act allowed American citizens to claim any uninhabited island containing valuable fertilizer deposits. One such entrepreneur, Peter Duncan, sailed to Navassa and declared it U.S. territory. Guano bird droppings rich in nitrates became a global commodity, used to feed crops and fuel empires. Within a year, mining companies were shipping thousands of tons from Navassa's cliffs. The workers who extracted it, mostly black labourers from the Caribbean and the US, lived in brutal conditions under white overseers. With no harbour, supplies arrived irregularly. Drinking water was scarce, and the heat unbearable. Those who disobeyed orders were beaten, isolated, or denied rations. In 1889, the pressure broke. The workers revolted, killing 5 overseers before being rescued by a passing ship. When the survivors were brought to trial in Baltimore, the court declared Navassa an American possession under the Guano Islands Act. 3 men were sentenced to death, though President Benjamin Harrison later commuted their sentences, acknowledging that their rebellion had been born from desperation. After the mines closed, Navassa fell silent again until the US Lighthouse Service arrived in 1917 to build a 162-foot beacon atop the cliffs. For half a century, keepers lived in extreme isolation, supplied by ship every few months. The logbooks they left behind tell stories of storms that cut them off for weeks and of eerie nights when strange lights were seen on the sea. In one 1929 entry, a keeper wrote, "Wind howling since dawn. Third man missing. No trace. Sea too rough to search." Some blamed the island's treacherous cliffs, others the solitude that gnawed at the mind. By the 1952nd, automation replaced human keepers, and the island was abandoned once more. Today, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lists Navassa as a protected refuge, though Haiti still claims sovereignty, citing 17th century French records placing the island within its historical boundaries. Yet neither nation maintains a settlement there. Access is prohibited without special clearance, enforced by occasional U.S. Coast Guard patrols. Those few who visited biologists and survey teams describe a haunting stillness. The lighthouse stands rusted but intact, its steps spiraling upward into emptiness. The ground is littered with old rail lines and mining debris, half swallowed by grass. At night, the wind moving through the cliffs produces an uncanny moan, a sound mistaken by sailors for voices. Some fishermen avoid the area entirely, saying it is cursed, a place where men once defied their masters and the sea claimed the rest. Satellites still capture faint signs of structures beneath the vegetation, but the island remains uninhabited. Time and tide have erased almost every trace of its past. Only the lighthouse continues to flash its lonely signal across the Caribbean night, warning ships away from the rocks, guarding an island that belongs to no one, and perhaps never truly did. One of the world's most remote islands now holds the highest density of plastic waste on Earth. Access is forbidden, except to scientists studying its slow suffocation beneath debris. Deep in the South Pacific, far from any continent or shipping route, lies Henderson Island, a speck of coral and limestone surrounded by thousands of kilometers of open sea. For centuries, it was thought to be one of the purest ecosystems on the planet, untouched by human hands. But today, it stands as a symbol of how far humanity's footprint has reached an island so isolated that no one lives there, yet so polluted that it has become a monument to waste. Henderson is part of the Pitcairn Islands, a British overseas territory. Barely 37 square kilometres across, it was once a sanctuary for rare birds and crabs, its beaches lined with coral fragments and shells. When British explorers arrived in 1606, they found no signs of habitation, only an abundance of wildlife thriving in pristine isolation. But centuries later, when modern scientists returned, they discovered a different scene. The white sands had turned into drifts of plastic. In 2015, a research team led by Jennifer Lovers of the University of Tasmania conducted a survey that shocked the world. They found over 37 million pieces of plastic on Henderson's beaches, an estimated 18 tons of debris, giving it the highest density of human-made waste ever recorded. Every wave brought more. Bottles, toothbrushes, lighters, and fishing gear lay scattered between the nests of seabirds. Even the crabs used bottle caps as shells. The pollution had not come from local sources. Henderson sits at the edge of the South Pacific Gyre, a vast ocean current that traps floating debris and carries it across thousands of miles. Plastics lost from ships and coastlines in South America, Asia, and Oceania circle the ocean for years before washing ashore here. The island has become a kind of accidental net, catching the world's garbage in its once pristine lagoon. For scientists, visiting Henderson is like walking through a paradox. Its sand glitters with tiny coloured fragments, microplastics broken down by sunlight and salt. Even the soil has become infused with them, forming what researchers now call plastiglomerate, a new kind of rock born from melted plastic fused with coral and sand. The irony is cruel. Henderson was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1988 for its isolation and ecological purity. It was meant to represent what Earth looked like before humans, an untouched refuge for life. Instead, it now mirrors what the entire planet may become if pollution continues unchecked. Scientists visiting under strict permits must carry out all their waste, sterilize equipment, and avoid disturbing nesting grounds. Yet even their presence feels bittersweet, as if the island is both laboratory and warning. There are no permanent structures, no noise except wind and surf. At night, the beaches glow faintly under moonlight, the waves dragging plastic deeper into the sea. Some of it will sink, most will return. Each year, storms expose layers buried beneath the sand, revealing decades of accumulation, a stratigraphy of the modern age. Henderson Island is a paradox of beauty and decay, proof that nowhere on Earth is beyond our reach. The ocean delivers reminders daily, and the island endures in silence, slowly suffocating under the weight of the world's waste. For decades, America's most secret nuclear and chemical tests took place here. The runway still stands, but the soil beneath it glows faintly under Geiger counters. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, more than 1,300 kilometers southwest of Hawaii, lies Johnston Atoll, a narrow ring of coral, concrete, and decay. From the air, it appears harmless. Turquoise reefs encircling a small airstrip surrounded by endless blue, but beneath the coral and sand lies a legacy of secrecy and contamination, the remains of one of the Cold War's most dangerous laboratories. Johnston was first claimed by the United States in 1858 under the Guano Islands Act, a law allowing Americans to seize uninhabited islands rich in fertilizer deposits. For decades, it was forgotten, a speck of coral visited only by seabirds and storms. Then, in the late 1952, as tensions between Washington and Moscow deepened, the island's isolation became its greatest asset. The US military turned Johnston into a staging ground for experiments that could never be seen by the public. Between 1958 and 1962, the island hosted some of the most controversial nuclear tests in American history. Under Operations Hardtack and Dominic, missiles carrying atomic warheads were launched into the upper atmosphere to study the effects of high-altitude detonations. Some succeeded, lighting the sky in eerie green and purple auroras visible across the Pacific. Others failed catastrophically. In July 1962, a Thor missile armed with a 1.4 megaton warhead exploded on the launch pad, scattering plutonium and uranium debris across the island. Cleanup crews, wearing minimal protection, buried the contaminated soil in shallow pits. Geiger counters still tick faster there today. After the nuclear program ended, Johnston's purpose shifted from testing destruction to storing it. During the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, it became a chemical weapons depot, housing thousands of tons of nerve agents like VX and sarin. The Johnston Atoll Chemical Agent Disposal System, JCADS, was built to burn the stockpiles in massive incinerators. Workers laboured in sealed suits, and every breath of air was filtered before release. By 2000, the last shell was destroyed. But the ground beneath remained toxic, laced with dioxins and heavy metals. When the facility shut down, everything, buildings, machines, even soil, was dismantled and buried under concrete caps. The island was then handed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, officially reclassified as a nature refuge. But the term feels ironic. Though seabirds nest among the ruins and corals grow in the lagoon, radiation and chemical residues still linger, too faint to kill but too persistent to forget. Today, Johnston Atoll is off-limits to civilians. Only automated instruments and the occasional inspection team visit. Satellite images reveal ghostly remnants of its past, the cracked runway, rusted fuel tanks, and the skeletal towers of abandoned radar arrays. Under the sun, The island looks peaceful, but visitors report an uncanny silence. Even the wind seems subdued, as if burdened by what happened there. The US government maintains that Johnston is safe, though its classified history tells another story. For decades, it was where humanity tested the limits of destruction and learned that some scars cannot be buried. The sea now laps gently against its shores, washing over decades of secrets, while the island itself remains a monument to power, secrecy, and the cost of progress. Descendants of the Bounty mutineers live here under British rule. Once famous for isolation, now infamous for dark crimes, visitors require explicit approval from the island's magistrate. Far out in the South Pacific, nearly halfway between New Zealand and South America, lies Pitcairn Island, a volcanic speck rising from 1,000 miles of open sea. For centuries, it has been seen as both sanctuary and exile. The island's cliffs glow red at sunset, its forests whisper with wind, and its population fewer than 50 carries one of the strangest legacies in maritime history. Pitcairn is where the mutineers of HMS Bounty fled to escape justice, and where their descendants still live, isolated from the world and haunted by their past. In 1789, the British naval ship Bounty erupted in mutiny. Led by Fletcher Christian, the rebels overthrew Captain William Bligh and seized the vessel. Knowing the Royal Navy would hunt them down, Christian and 8 fellow mutineers fled deep into the Pacific, eventually landing on an uncharted island. Pitcairn offered everything they needed: fertile soil, freshwater springs, and cliffs that made invasion nearly impossible. They burned the Bounty to prevent detection and began new lives with a group of Polynesian men and women they had brought with them from Tahiti. What began as a dream of freedom soon dissolved into chaos. The small colony fractured under jealousy, violence, and isolation. Within a decade, nearly all the male settlers were dead, many murdered, others driven to madness. Only one mutineer, John Adams, survived long enough to restore order, teaching the next generation to read from a Bible salvaged from the ship. By the early 19th century, when a British vessel rediscovered Pitcairn, the community had become a Christian settlement ruled by Adams's strict code of faith and discipline. For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, Pitcairn was romanticized as a paradise of innocence, a tropical Eden built on redemption. But isolation hides as much as it preserves. In 2004, that image shattered when a British investigation uncovered a pattern of sexual abuse spanning decades. Nearly every adult man on the island was charged, including descendants of the original mutineers. The trials, held under British jurisdiction, exposed how isolation had twisted social norms. Generations had grown up without oversight, without law, and without escape. Today, Pitcairn remains one of the world's smallest democracies, technically a British overseas territory, governed by a local council under a magistrate appointed from abroad. Only a handful of families remain. There are no hospitals, no airports, and a single supply ship visits just a few times a year. The internet link is slow and unreliable. Children must leave the island for education, and many never return. Abandoned houses stand empty, overgrown by vines, their doors still open to the sea breeze. Visitors need official permission to land, often waiting months for approval. Those who make the journey describe a haunting beauty: cliffs carved by wind, groves of mango and breadfruit, and the rusting remains of the Bounty still visible beneath the surf. But they also speak of a strange, quiet island that feels heavy with memory. At night, the only light comes from stars and the glow of the lighthouse. Built to warn ships away from the reefs, Pitcairn is a paradise scarred by history, a living remnant of rebellion, faith, and secrecy. It endures as a place where freedom once came at the cost of isolation, and where the sins of the past still echo through the waves that guard it. Military radars track unidentified lights near this volcanic island. Brazil forbids entry to civilians. In 1958, the Navy photographed a disc-shaped object hovering over the cliffs. Far out in the South Atlantic, more than 1,000 kilometers off Brazil's eastern coast, rises Trindade Island, a jagged volcanic peak surrounded by restless seas. It is small, desolate, and nearly unreachable, battered constantly by waves and wind. Yet this remote outpost has become one of Brazil's most mysterious territories, a place where science, secrecy, and the unexplained collide. Trindade was first discovered by Portuguese explorers in the early 1500s. Over the centuries, it served as a haven for pirates, whalers, and passing naval expeditions. But its isolation made permanent settlement impossible. The island has no fresh water, no shelter, and cliffs that make landing treacherous. Brazil officially took possession in the 19th century and established a small naval base there, using it to monitor the open ocean and study marine life. Since then, civilian access has been heavily restricted. Only researchers and military personnel may visit, and every arrival must be cleared through the Brazilian Navy. The island's geology is as violent as its weather. Trindade is the peak of a submerged volcanic chain that stretches thousands of kilometers along the ocean floor. Its steep ridges are covered with hardened lava flows and twisted basalt columns that look almost sculpted. The sea around it plunges to depths of over 5,000 meters. Storms arrive without warning, and the entire island shakes with low rumbles that scientists attribute to undersea seismic activity. But locals along Brazil's coast whisper another explanation, that something beneath the island is alive. Trindade entered the realm of global mystery in January 1958. During a routine oceanographic expedition by the Brazilian Navy ship Almirante Saldanha, crew members spotted a strange metallic object approaching the island. Among them was photographer Almiro Baraúna, who captured a series of images showing a disc-shaped craft hovering above the peaks before vanishing into the clouds. The photographs, later published by the Brazilian government, caused an international sensation. They were analysed by the Navy's own technicians, who declared them authentic with no evidence of manipulation. For a time, the Trindade UFO was the world's most credible unexplained sighting, even drawing attention from US intelligence agencies. Skeptics argued it was a hoax, but the original negatives were never proven false. What makes the story stranger is that radar installations on the island reportedly detected unidentified signals that same week fast-moving objects without transponder codes. The data was classified, and the Navy has never released full details. Since then, Trindade has been at the centre of countless theories. Some believe it was the site of early Cold War experiments, testing new propulsion technologies under the guise of atmospheric research. Others suggest it lies above a magnetic anomaly, a region where compasses spin and electronic instruments fail. Scientists working on the island have indeed reported interference with communication equipment and unexplained power fluctuations during storms. Today, Trindade remains under strict military control. A handful of personnel maintain the base, running weather stations and seismic sensors. The rest of the island belongs to the seabirds, thousands of frigates, boobies, and petrels nesting in the cliffs. The winds howl day and night, and the sea crashes endlessly below. No one stays longer than necessary. Satellite images reveal little more than a few antennas and supply huts, yet rumours persist of underground tunnels and sealed vaults built during the 1,960 seconds. Whether true or myth, they fit the island's atmosphere perfectly, a place where nature and secrecy intertwine. When night falls, Trindade disappears into darkness, its cliffs lost in the roaring surf. Somewhere above or below, lights have been seen flickering, silent and unexplained. Whatever they are, they remain as untouchable as the island itself, a mystery suspended between ocean and sky. Off Yemen, Socotra's trees twist into shapes seen nowhere else on Earth. Its remoteness preserved plants that look prehistoric, but political conflict has sealed it off once more. Rising from the Arabian Sea like a dream half remembered, Socotra Island seems almost unreal, a fragment of another world adrift between Africa and Arabia. For millennia, Sailors called it the Island of Bliss, a place where the winds carried strange scents and the cliffs glowed red beneath the setting sunday. Today, it is often called the most alien-looking place on Earth. Yet the truth is even stranger. Socotra is not alien at all, but a living time capsule, a remnant of a prehistoric ecosystem older than most continents. Located about 350 kilometers off Yemen's southern coast, Socotra belongs to an archipelago of 4 islands, isolated for more than 20 million years. This separation allowed life here to evolve in solitude. Over a third of Socotra's plant species exist nowhere else survivors from an ancient world. The most iconic of all is the dragon's blood tree, a mushroom-shaped canopy that bleeds crimson sap when cut. Locals once traded this resin as medicine and dye. Ancient Greek and Roman texts called it the blood of dragons. When seen from above, these trees look like umbrellas shading a forgotten planet. The landscape itself is surreal limestone plateaus split by canyons, dunes that vanish into mist, and coastal cliffs where caves open like mouths. Fossils of ancient seashells lie embedded high in the mountains, remnants of a time when the island lay beneath the ocean. The air carries the scent of frankincense and salt. Bats roost in caverns untouched by humans, and giant centipedes crawl through the dark beneath rocks that have never been turned. For centuries, Socotra remained cut off from the wider world. Its people, numbering only about 60,000 today, lived in stone villages and herded goats across the highlands. Their language, Socotri, has no written form and is unrelated to modern Arabic. Preserved through oral tradition like an echo from the Bronze Age, Western explorers who arrived in the 19th century described the island as a living fossil, home to creatures that seemed half plant, half animal. In 2008, UNESCO declared Socotra a World Heritage Site, recognizing its unique biodiversity. But just as scientific interest grew, Yemen's civil conflict began to spill across the region. Flights were halted, research halted, and international access restricted. Only a handful of humanitarian and environmental missions have reached the island in recent years, travelling under tight military escort. Even so, reports suggest increasing ecological strain, illegal logging, invasive species, and the slow creep of climate change drying out once lush forests. Those who have walked its interior say that Socotra feels eerily timeless. The sky burns a deep orange at dusk, and the wind carries a low hum through the dragon's blood, grows a sound like breathing. At night, the desert floor glows with bioluminescent plankton swept in by the tide. It is a place where modernity falls away, and evolution itself feels close enough to touch. Scientists call Socotra a laboratory of life. Poets call it the island that forgot to die. But to the few who still live there, it is simply home fragile, sacred and guarded by the sea. As war and modern pressures close in from beyond the horizon, Socotra stands as a reminder of what the world once was, and what it might lose forever if silence, once broken, is never restored. Satellite images show weather structures built, then abandoned. No official record explains who built them. The ice winds erase every footprint within hours. Far north in Canada's Hudson Bay lies Coates Island, a cold, lonely plateau of stone, snow, and silence. Few have ever seen it in person. From orbit, it appears as a pale crescent surrounded by ice floes, a barren shape fading in and out of fog. On most maps, it's marked only as a bird sanctuary, but beneath that unassuming label hides a mystery that has unsettled Arctic researchers for decades. Strange installations that appear, disappear, and leave behind no trace of who built them. Coates Island measures roughly 5,500 square kilometers larger than some countries, yet almost completely lifeless. Its cliffs rise 300 meters above the sea, lashed year-round by winds from the Arctic Circle. The temperature rarely breaks freezing, and the landscape is devoid of trees. For centuries, Inuit hunters avoided the place, calling it Akpatok's Shadow, a land where the ground remembers metal and the air hums when no one moves. Few dared to stay long. The first modern records of unusual activity date back to the 1940 seconds. Allied pilots flying over Hudson Bay during World War II reported seeing reflective shapes near Coates Island's northern tip, geometric patterns that glinted under the sun, as if from metal rooftops. When later flights passed the same coordinates, nothing remained. The reports were filed and forgotten, lost among wartime intelligence noise, but in the 1990 seconds, the mystery resurfaced. Using early satellite imaging, Canadian geographers noticed rectangular formations on the island lines too straight to be natural, clustered in precise grids. They appeared one season and vanished the next. When teams tried to investigate, blizzards grounded their aircraft or buried their landing zones. The few who reached the island found only frost and rocks, yet magnetic instruments behaved erratically, swinging wildly before returning to normal once they left the area. Some historians speculate these were remnants of Cold War experiments. During the 1950 seconds, both the US and Canada built radar stations across the Arctic as part of the DEW line, a defensive network meant to detect Soviet bombers. But the coordinates don't match any declassified site, and no construction records exist. Others suspect weather or ionospheric research, possibly tied to early atmospheric surveillance. The lack of documentation, however, has kept the island shrouded in quiet uncertainty. In 2003, a wildlife survey team discovered corroded antenna fragments and pieces of prefabricated metal shelters half buried in permafrost. Radiation tests showed faint anomalies, not enough to indicate nuclear material, but above natural background levels. The artifacts were collected and flown south, yet no public report ever followed. Today, Coates Island remains uninhabited. The Canadian government classifies it as a restricted ecological zone, citing its importance for migratory seabirds. No commercial flights pass overhead. Scientists who work nearby describe hearing low mechanical hums, carried on the wind, perhaps the resonance of shifting ice, perhaps something else. Each winter, new satellite scans show fleeting shapes on the tundra. Grids, shadows, or outlines that vanish by spring thaw, whether they are tricks of light, relics of forgotten research, or the remnants of something deliberately hidden, no one can say. And so the island sleeps, its snow erasing footprints, its silence burying answers. In the endless cold, Coates Island endures as one of the Arctic's last unsolved enigmas, a place where even the machines that once watched the sky have vanished into the ice. Here, the planet's tectonic plates thrust from the sea itself. Only geologists under strict permit may land. Even they call it the island that shakes beneath your feet. In the roaring subantarctic seas between New Zealand and Antarctica lies Macquarie Island, a sliver of rock where the Earth's hidden machinery rises into daylight. It is one of the few places on the planet where you can stand directly upon the collision of two tectonic plates. From afar, it appears as a jagged green spine surrounded by grey waves, but beneath its slopes, the world itself is folding an island born not from eruption, but from pressure thrust upward by the slow violence of the Earth's crust. Macquarie Island is small, just 34 kilometres long and 5 kilometres wide, yet it carries the weight of geological history. The Indo-Australian Plate and the Pacific Plate meet here not side by side, but head-on. Over millions of years, their grinding collision forced the seafloor upward, exposing rock once buried 6 kilometres deep beneath the ocean. This makes Macquarie unique. It's the only known place where pieces of the planet's mantle have risen above sea level intact. To walk across its slopes is to tread on the bones of the Earth. The island's cliffs are layered with peridotite, serpentine, and basalt minerals that gleam green and black under cold sunlight. The land groans with motion, Tiny tremors ripple daily through the ground, sometimes strong enough to rattle camp gear and instruments. Geologists describe the experience as standing on a living hinge. In 1989, a magnitude 8.2 earthquake struck offshore, one of the strongest ever recorded in the Southern Ocean. It reshaped entire sections of coastline, raising some beaches by meters while others sank beneath the waves. Despite its violence, Macquarie teems with life. Elephant seals sprawl across the beaches like grey mountains, and hundreds of thousands of royal penguins nest along the tussock-covered slopes. The air is filled with the cries of albatrosses wheeling through constant wind. Yet the environment remains brutally harsh. Winds can exceed 150 kilometers per hour, and rain or sleet falls nearly every day of the year. Scientists stationed here speak of horizontal weather, storms so strong they flatten tents and sandblast rock. The island's isolation has preserved it from most human interference. Designated a World Heritage Site in 1997, it is one of the most tightly controlled ecosystems on Earth. Only researchers with special permits may land, and even they follow strict decontamination protocols to prevent introducing foreign species. Supplies arrive twice a year by ship, and during winter, the island becomes unreachable for months. Beneath this icy solitude, Macquarie remains in motion. GPS monitors placed along its ridges record millimeters of uplift each year, who evidence that the collision below continues. In many ways, it is a natural seismograph, a visible record of the planet's restless heart. Scientists studying it call the island a textbook of creation, where continental birth happens not in an instant, but over eons. At night, the sky burns with southern auroras, green curtains of light shifting above the Black Sea. The wind howls through the cliffs, like the echo of something ancient and vast. Those few who've lived here say the island feels alive, breathing, shifting, never still. Macquarie Island is more than a rock in the ocean. It is the Earth turned inside out, a living seam between worlds, where continents meet, time folds, and the planet quietly builds itself anew. Locals say it's sacred ground where the spirits of the dead walk at dusk. At the far eastern edge of Timor-Leste, where the mountains descend into the turquoise sea, lies Jacko Island, a small, perfect circle of sand and forest that seems to float just beyond the reach of time. It measures barely 8 square kilometers, yet it holds centuries of reverence. For the Timorese people, Jacko is more than land. It is sacred, a bridge between the living and the dead, where the ancestors still walk in silence when the light fades. By day, Jacko looks like paradise. Its waters shimmer like glass, revealing coral gardens and shoals of fish that scatter in flashes of colour. The beaches are untouched, free from footprints or buildings. From the nearby mainland cliffs of Tutuala, visitors can see it across a narrow channel, glowing under the midday sun like a fragment of another world. Yet as beautiful as it is, no one lives there. The Timorese government, honouring the island's lulik, its spiritual sanctity, forbids overnight stays. Every visitor must leave before dusk. Local legend tells that Jacko is the gateway of souls. When a person dies, their spirit must travel eastward to cross the sea, guided by the sunset's reflection, to rest beneath the island's trees. To step upon its sands after dark, the elders warn, is to disturb the passage of the dead. Fishermen who linger past twilight say their engines stall, the air grows heavy, and the sea itself begins to whisper. Whether superstition or something deeper, few risk testing it. For biologists, Jacko's isolation has preserved an ecosystem almost untouched by modern life. The island is part of the Nino Conis Santana National Park, home to rare birds like the Timor green pigeon and the yellow-crested cockatoo. The surrounding reef is one of the healthiest in the region, untouched by bleaching. Its coral alive with colour. Scientists visiting under special permits are required to bring everything they need, leaving no trace behind. Even tents must be dismantled before sunset. Yet beyond its natural wonder, there is something intangible that makes Jacko feel different. Visitors describe an uneasy stillness that descends as evening approaches, as if the island itself exhales. The waves quiet, the air grows dense, even the birds stop calling. Some say it's the spirits crossing, others the weight of centuries of respect. Whatever it is, everyone who comes here leaves feeling the same, that this small island exists halfway between worlds. The government's protection has kept Jacko pristine, but also lonely. Modern tourism has never reached it. There are no docks, no roads, no lights visible from the sea. The only way to visit is by small canoe from Tutuala, paddling across waters so clear you can see the sand rippling 30 meters below. And when the sun begins to fall, the guides always turn back. When night covers the island, Jacko disappears entirely unlit, uninhabited, and perfectly silent. Those watching from the mainland sometimes report faint glows in the trees, like embers moving in slow circles, or the sound of distant singing carried by the wind. No one knows what truly happens there after dark, only that by morning the beaches are smooth again, the footprints gone, and the island seems as untouched as it has always been. Scattered coral ruins hint at an ancient civilization lost before Polynesian memory. Deep in the central Pacific, over 1,500 kilometers south of Hawaii, lies Malden Island, a low, windswept oval of coral and salt flats surrounded by endless sea. It looks barren, lifeless, forgotten. Yet beneath its sun-bleached surface stand silent traces of a civilization no one can name. Dozens of stone temples and raised platforms are lined so precisely that even modern archaeologists struggle to explain them. Malden is small, just 39 square kilometers. But from the air it resembles a patterned labyrinth. When British explorers first landed here in 1825, they found something astonishing. Rows of coral stone structures built in geometric order, each several meters tall, with walls of fitted limestone slabs. Some faced the horizon. Others were aligned to the rising sunday. There were no carvings, no tools, no inscriptions, only ghostly architecture, as if the builders had vanished mid-construction. The discoverers aboard HMS Blonde named the island after their lieutenant, Charles Robert Malden. They noted that the structures resembled no known Polynesian design, too massive, too mathematically precise. Later surveys counted over 40 ceremonial platforms connected by ancient pathways. Some scientists speculated they were temples or star observatories. Others imagined they might be burial grounds or navigation markers left by an unknown voyaging culture. But carbon dating has yielded no clear answers. Adding to the mystery, Malden has no fresh water, no trees, and no evidence of permanent habitation. Yet the island's orientation to the sun and stars suggests a deep astronomical awareness. Some alignments mark solstices with uncanny accuracy, leading researchers to believe the builders came with purpose, perhaps to watch the heavens or honour deities now lost to memory. After the 19th century, Malden's ancient puzzle was overshadowed by another kind of human intrusion. In the 1,950 seconds, the British government used the island as a staging base for Operation Grapple, a series of hydrogen bomb tests conducted in the nearby Line Islands. The military built airstrips, barracks and radar towers, transforming the deserted atoll into a hub of controlled detonation. When the tests ended, everything was abandoned machinery, drums and buried contaminants left beneath the coral. Radiation levels, though diminished, remain high enough that Malden has been declared off-limits to the public ever since. Today, only seabirds and crabs wander its surface. The old temples still stand in the salt wind, eroding slowly, but holding their shape, ancient precision resisting decay. Satellite imagery shows faint rectangular shadows, remnants of both civilizations, one prehistoric and unknown, the other modern and secret. Standing amid those twin ruins, it's hard not to see a pattern repeating: humanity rising, building, abandoning, and leaving behind monuments to both faith and folly. The island itself feels suspended between epochs, its silence divided by two kinds of ghosts: the nameless builders who first shaped stone, and the scientists who later split atoms above it. The sea continues to reclaim the island inch by inch. Waves wash over the coral shore, whispering through the cracks of temples and bunkers alike. And beneath the radiation-scorched sand, somewhere between myth and memory, the lost architects of Malden still keep their secrets. Once marked on centuries of maps off Mexico's Yucatan coast, then gone. In 1997, a naval expedition searched the coordinates. Nothing but open sea remained. Some say it was erased on purpose. In the northern Gulf of Mexico, just beyond the shallow waters of the Campeche Bank, there was once said to be a small island called Bermeja, a reddish patch of coral and sand that appeared on maps for over 400 years. Spanish cartographers recorded it as early as 1539, describing its reddish hue that glowed under the tropical Sunday. For generations, sailors used it as a navigational landmark. Yet today, Bermeja exists only on paper, an island that once was, and then, inexplicably, was not. Throughout the colonial era, maps from Spain, Britain, and France all charted Bermeja's position roughly 100 kilometers north of the Yucatan Peninsula. Even into the 19th century, Mexican naval documents identified it as national territory. It seemed unremarkable, little more than a reef with some dry sand, too small for settlement, but its location held future importance. Whoever claimed Bermeja could extend their exclusive economic zone hundreds of kilometers into the Gulf, gaining rights to vast oil and gas reserves beneath the sea. Then, in the late 20th century, the island vanished from maps. When the Mexican Navy conducted a formal search in 1997 using sonar and radar equipment, they found nothing: no reef, no shoal, not even a trace of submerged rock. The coordinates where Bermeja had long been drawn showed only deep, featureless ocean. The government's final report concluded that the island had either sunk, eroded, or never existed at all. Yet that conclusion sparked more questions than it answered. Many in Mexico doubted the official explanation. Environmental scientists argued that natural erosion could not erase an entire island so quickly without leaving evidence. Others suspected something more deliberate. In the 1,990 seconds, Mexico and the United States were negotiating the maritime boundaries of the Gulf, a process that would determine ownership of lucrative underwater oil fields. If Bermeja still existed, Mexico's claim would expand dramatically. But with its disappearance, the border shifted north, favoring US control. To some, the timing seemed too precise to be coincidence. Conspiracy theories began to circulate that the island had been destroyed intentionally, perhaps by secret demolition, or submerged by controlled explosions. Some even claimed satellite imagery once revealed faint outlines of the island before it was digitally erased. None of these claims were proven, but the mystery deepened when the original British Admiralty charts from the 1800s were re-examined and confirmed Bermeja's presence with accurate coordinates. A second expedition in 2009 again found nothing. Modern sonar scans showed the seafloor at those coordinates to be nearly 2,000 meters deep, far too deep for erosion to have removed an island so completely. And yet, the old maps persist. Bermeja appears not as myth or error, but as a consistent fixture of centuries of navigation. Today, Bermeja's absence is treated as a geopolitical riddle. Officially, it is classified as a phantom island, a landform once believed real but later disproven. Yet fishermen along the Yucatan still whisper that on certain calm evenings, the sea glows red where the island should be, and compasses drift slightly off course. Whether this is optical illusion, magnetic anomaly, or something left behind, no one can say. Perhaps Bermeja never existed. Or perhaps it was erased, swallowed by politics, the ocean, or both. What remains is a void on the map, a hole in maritime memory where fact and rumour overlap. Somewhere beneath the waves, the Gulf holds its secret, a lost island that still refuses to die in history's records.